At 12:07 a.m., my 7-year-old niece Emma called me, whispering so hard I could hear her teeth chatter. "Auntie, I'm so hungry. He locked me in here. Mom won't wake up." I told her I was coming, called 911 before I pulled out, then called her back hands-free. 8 minutes later, I was pounding on my sister's front door. No lights. No answer. The dispatcher knew a child was trapped with an unresponsive adult, but no responder had reached the room yet. I grabbed the tire iron from my trunk and smashed the side window. What I found inside told me this was more than one argument gone wrong. If you've ever had to show up for someone you love when everything suddenly felt wrong, stay with me. Before that call, I had no reason to believe my sister's house was dangerous. Unhappy sometimes, yes. Tense, certainly. Melissa had canceled dinners over the previous year and blamed work, headaches, Emma being tired, Ryan having an early morning. I had noticed she sounded more careful on the phone whenever he was nearby, but careful was not the same as frightened, and I had trained myself not to confuse concern with permission to invade another adult's life. I was 46, 8 years older than Melissa, and I had spent most of my life being the sister who fixed things before anyone had to ask twice. Flat tire, missed mortgage payment, school pickup, funeral paperwork if somebody in my family was overwhelmed. I was already reaching for my keys. Melissa used to tease that I could turn a kitchen fire into a spreadsheet. Lately, though, she had become more private. Every time I asked whether everything was all right, she gave me a reason that sounded ordinary enough to accept. I accepted it because I loved her, and because adults are allowed to make choices their sisters do not understand. That night I had gone to bed a little before 11. Late August heat still clung to Columbus, and even with the air conditioner running, the upstairs bedroom of my townhome felt close and warm. I remember that because I woke with one foot outside the sheet and my phone vibrating against the wood of the nightstand. The screen said Melissa. For half a second I assumed it was a wrong tap, some accidental midnight call from a phone buried in a purse. Then I answered, and heard breathing. Not adult breathing. Small, uneven breaths. Each one caught and released like somebody trying not to make noise. "Melissa?" A whisper came back. "Auntie?" I sat up so quickly the room tilted. "Emma?" She did not answer right away. I could hear fabric shifting, then a tiny wet sniff. My niece was 7, still young enough to lose both front teeth in the same month, and believe I had secret authority over ice cream shops because I knew how to order from the drive-thru without looking at the menu. She was not a child who called me in the middle of the night. She did not have her own phone. I glanced at the clock. 12:07. "Sweetheart, where are you?" "In my room." "Is your mom there?" Another pause. Then the sentence that turned my body cold despite the August heat. "Auntie, I'm so hungry." There are phrases adults can dress up with context. Hungry, from a child at midnight, can mean skip dessert, or a small dinner, or simply that bedtime suddenly feels very far away. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Okay, we'll fix that. Can you go to the kitchen?" "No." "Why not?" Her whisper broke. "He locked me in here." I stopped breathing for a second. "Who, honey? Ryan?" "I think he left." That was not an answer to who had locked the door, but it was the answer a frightened 7-year-old could give. I did not make her explain more than she knew. "Can you open the door from your side?" I tried. "Is your mom with you?" "Yes. Can you put her on the phone?" This time Emma made a sound I had never heard from her before, something between a sob and an effort not to sob. "Mom won't wake up." I was out of bed before she finished the sentence. I pulled yesterday's jeans from the chair, jammed my feet into shoes without socks, and carried the phone downstairs. My heart had begun pounding so hard that every sound in the house seemed to pulse with it. The air conditioner clicking off, the refrigerator humming, the metallic slap of my keys when I knocked them from the bowl by the door. I forced myself to slow down long enough to ask what mattered. Was Melissa breathing? Emma said yes. Had she fallen? Emma said she did not know exactly. Mom was on the floor beside the bed when she finally stopped talking to her. Was there blood? A little, Emma whispered, then immediately asked if her mother was going to die. I don't know what happened yet, I told her. Listen to me. I'm coming right now. Don't try to climb out a window. Stay with Mom. Keep the phone with you. If she throws up, don't put anything in her mouth. I'm going to call people who can help us get in. Emma knew Melissa's 6-digit passcode because my sister had taught it to her for ordinary emergencies. That small family habit was the only reason I was hearing her voice at all. I told her I had to hang up for less than a minute. She begged me not to. I promised I would call back. Then I ended the call and dialed 911 before I even backed out of my driveway. I gave the dispatcher the address first, then the facts as cleanly as I could. 7-year-old child locked in a bedroom, adult female inside the room unresponsive but breathing, possible head injury, adult male who may have left the residence. The dispatcher asked whether I was at the house. I said I was 8 minutes away and pulling out now. She told me not to put myself in danger and said police and EMS were being sent. I did not argue. I set the phone in its mount, put the car in drive, and when the dispatcher had what she needed, I called Emma back hands-free. She answered on the first vibration. I'm here, I said. I'm driving to you. Okay. The word came out too obediently. Not relieved, not curious. Just okay, as though waiting was something she had been told how to do. The roads were nearly empty. Traffic lights hung over broad intersections, like red eyes in the dark, and I remember resenting every second I had to slow down even when there was no one coming. I did not run lights. I did not need to create another emergency on the way to the first. I kept talking to Emma in short, simple sentences. I asked her to tell me whether her mother's chest was moving. I asked whether Melissa reacted when Emma said her name or touched her shoulder. She did not. Emma said the room smelled bad. Then, after I asked one careful question, said her mother had gotten sick on the carpet earlier. She did not know how long ago. Time had become slippery for her. Did you eat dinner? I asked. No. Lunch? At school. It was the first week of first grade, and for one absurd instant I pictured the purple lunchbox Melissa had bought her, the one with a silver star on the zipper. The ordinary image nearly undid me. I gripped the steering wheel harder. Do you have water? There's some in my bottle. Take a little sip. Don't drink too fast. I saved some for Mom. That sentence hit harder than the others. I told her there would be more water when I got there. She did not need to save hers. She said okay again. When I turned onto Melissa's street, I expected flashing lights. Instead, I saw a row of dark suburban houses, porch lamps, parked cars, sprinklers ticking somewhere in the distance. My sister's house sat halfway down the block, a modest 3-bedroom she had bought years before Ryan moved in. Her porch light was off. Ryan's SUV was gone from the driveway. Melissa's car was still there. I'm outside, I told Emma. Her breathing changed. Auntie? I'm right here. I parked crookedly at the curb, left the engine running and ran to the front door. The night air felt thick against my skin. I pounded with the side of my fist hard enough to hurt. Melissa, Emma, it's Laura. Nothing. I rang the bell, hit it again, tried the handle. Locked. I called Melissa's name until my throat burned. The house remained dark except for a faint wash of light somewhere deeper inside. I could hear Emma through the phone, but not through the walls. No one's answering, I said, trying not to let fear sharpen my voice. I'm going around the side. Auntie, Mom still won't wake up. I know. I'm getting in. I had already told dispatch I was on scene. Responders were coming, but no one had reached the bedroom, and I could not stand outside a locked house while a child counted her mother's breaths. I ran back to my car, opened the trunk and grabbed the tire iron. I had never broken a window in my life, in every sensible version of myself, breaking into a house, belonged to somebody else. Police, firefighters, people with equipment and gloves and training. But Melissa's side window was low enough to reach, and I knew the layout of her home. Beyond it was a small den that opened to the hallway. I wrapped my forearm in the light jacket I kept in the trunk, turned my face away, and swung. The first hit cracked the glass, but did not open it. The sound was shockingly loud in the sleeping neighborhood. A dog started barking 2 houses over. I swung again. Glass collapsed inward in glittering pieces. I used the tire iron to knock the jagged edges away, then reached through carefully and released the latch. Somewhere behind me, I finally heard a distant siren. I climbed through. The den smelled stale and warm. My shoe crunched on glass. I called Melissa's name again, then Emma's. This time I heard a thin cry from down the hall. "Auntie, I'm inside." I moved toward her voice and stopped so abruptly I nearly slipped. Emma's bedroom door was shut. Mounted high on the hallway side of the frame was a surface barrel bolt, the kind of simple metal latch meant for a shed or an interior door you wanted secured from one side. The bolt was slid into place from the hallway. I stared at it for one stunned beat, because my mind wanted another explanation. Maybe Melissa had installed it for some harmless reason. Maybe someone had forgotten it was there. But Emma was on the other side. She had told me Ryan locked her in. No 7-year-old standing inside that room could have reached through solid wood and slid a hallway bolt shut behind herself. I shoved it open. Emma was standing 3 feet from the door, holding Melissa's phone with both hands. Her hair was tangled around her face, and she wore a t-shirt that came almost to her knees. She did not run toward me. She looked past me first, down the hallway, as if checking whether someone else was there. Then she saw it was only me, and folded against my body so hard, I staggered. "You came." Of course I came. She was hot and shaking at the same time. I crouched and held her for only a second before I saw Melissa. My sister lay on her side, between the bed and the dresser, one arm crooked beneath her. There was dried vomit on the carpet near her face. A dark swelling had risen along her temple near the hairline. Her skin looked wrong, not pale exactly, but emptied of the color I knew. I crossed the room and knelt beside her, saying her name, touching her shoulder, feeling for breath, because I needed my own hand to confirm what Emma had already told me. Melissa was breathing. She did not wake. I said her name louder. Nothing. Emma hovered at my back. I kept saying it. "You did exactly right calling me." "Is she mad?" The question was so out of place that I turned. "Who?" "Mom." "No, honey. I used her phone." "You were supposed to. This is an emergency." She watched my face as if she needed to see whether I meant it. I did not ask why she thought using a phone to call for help might make her mother angry. I did not ask how long she had been taught to wait before deciding she was allowed to stop waiting. Those questions came later. That night, they would have required Emma to explain a world I had only just entered, and she was 7 years old and hungry. The first officers came through the front after I opened it from inside, with EMS seconds behind them. Everything accelerated and narrowed at once. I stepped back when paramedics took Melissa's place on the floor. I answered what I knew and refused to guess at what I did not. Yes, Emma had called me. Yes, she said Ryan had locked the door. No, Ryan was not present when I arrived. Yes, I had broken the side window. I pointed to the hallway bolt without touching it again. One officer photographed the latch and door frame, while another checked the rest of the house. Emma clung to my hand. When a paramedic asked when Melissa had last been awake, Emma said, "Before it got really dark," then looked ashamed because she could not be more precise. I squeezed her fingers and told her nobody expected her to know the time. She said her mother had talked funny for a while after hitting her head and had tried to sit up, then lay down again. She said Ryan had already gone by the time Mom stopped answering. The paramedic did not interrogate her. He only asked what he needed to treat Melissa. They put a collar around my sister's neck, started monitoring her, and prepared to move her. I stood close enough for Emma to see me, but far enough not to block anyone. The room was not a dungeon. There were stuffed animals on a shelf, school clothes folded on a chair, crayons in a cup, a library book open face down beside the bed. That normality was what made it unbearable. Nothing about the room announced itself as a place where a child might need rescue. The horror was the bolt on the outside, the untouched dinner hour, the little girl conserving water beside an unconscious mother, while the adult who could have called for help had left. When they lifted Melissa onto the stretcher, Emma started crying in earnest. "I want Mom." "I know. Can I go with her?" One of the paramedics explained gently that space and treatment needs meant she could not ride beside Melissa the way she wanted. I told Emma I would stay with her and follow to the hospital as soon as we were cleared to leave. She nodded, but her eyes never left the stretcher until it disappeared down the hallway. Only then did I notice the duffel bag. It sat near the front entry, half tucked beside a console table, zipped closed and bulging enough to have been packed in a hurry. A child's denim jacket was caught beneath one handle. I knew that jacket. Emma wore it even when August did not require one. Beside the bag sat Melissa's purse and a pair of flat shoes, both close to the door. For the first time since the phone rang, something like relief moved through me. She had been leaving. That was what I thought. I did not open the bag. I did not move it. An officer was documenting the house, and I had no reason to turn my sister's belongings into a puzzle. The simplest explanation seemed obvious. Melissa had finally decided to take Emma and get out. Ryan had stopped them, and everything had exploded from there. It was a terrible explanation, but it gave me one thing to hold on to. My sister had tried. Outside, blue and red light washed across the siding and neighboring lawns. The warm night had filled with radios, footsteps, and the low mechanical sounds of the ambulance. Emma sat wrapped in a thin blanket on my front passenger seat, while an officer finished taking my basic information. She accepted a sealed packet of crackers and a bottle of water from a responder. She ate slowly, almost cautiously, then folded the empty wrapper into a small square and put it in the cup holder instead of dropping it. I watched her and felt the first hard edge of anger settle beneath the fear. Ryan had left a 7-year-old behind a bolted door with an injured woman who could not reliably stand, then could not wake. Whatever argument had happened before that, whatever words adults would later use to soften it or explain it, those facts were physical. Door, bolt, child. Unresponsive mother, empty driveway. But I still believed the worst part of the story belonged entirely to him. At the hospital, Melissa disappeared behind doors. I could not follow through while staff evaluated her head injury. I stayed with Emma in a family waiting area until another responder came over to confirm basic details for the report. He asked whether Melissa had said anything to me recently about leaving Ryan. I told him no. Then he asked whether I had seen anything in the house suggesting she had packed to go. My mind went straight to the duffel bag beside the front door, the denim jacket caught under its handle, Melissa's purse nearby. For the first time that night, I let myself breathe. "I think she finally had," I said. For the next several hours, I held on to that belief as if it were a railing in a dark stairwell. Melissa had been trying to leave. The bag by the door meant she had made a decision, even if she had made it late. Ryan had stopped her. The argument had turned physical, and my sister had ended up unconscious while her daughter waited behind a locked door. That version was terrible enough. I did not yet understand how much comfort I was taking from the idea that there was only one adult in that house whose choices needed explaining. By a little after 3 a.m, the emergency department had become the kind of place where time stopped behaving normally. Emma had dozed against my side in a vinyl chair, still wearing the oversized t-shirt she had been trapped in. A nurse had found her a pair of hospital socks because she had arrived without shoes. Every so often she startled awake and asked the same 2 questions in different forms: whether Mom was awake yet, and whether we could see her. I answered only what I knew. The doctors were checking Melissa's head. She was breathing on her own. They had taken her for scans. We would see her when the staff said it was safe. The CT showed a small acute subdural hematoma. The doctor explained it in plain language because I told him I was not going to pretend I understood medical shorthand at 3:30 in the morning. There was bleeding around Melissa's brain, small enough that they did not think she needed surgery, but significant enough that they wanted close neurological observation. The fact that she had briefly come around after hitting her head and then become harder to wake fit the injury they were seeing. She would stay in the hospital, likely around 48 hours, if the bleeding stayed stable and her symptoms improved. The words "no surgery" should have reassured me more than they did. All I could see was Melissa on Emma's floor, breathing but unreachable. Emma's father had died when she was 2, so there was no second parent to call. By dawn, after the immediate police questions had slowed and the hospital had confirmed Melissa would not be going home that morning, a Franklin County child welfare worker began arranging what everyone kept calling a temporary kinship plan. The language sounded formal. The reality was simpler. Emma needed to sleep somewhere safe with an adult she knew, and I was the closest family member who could take her. I signed what I needed to sign, answered questions about my home, my work schedule, whether Emma had ever stayed with me before, whether there were firearms in the house, whether anyone else lived there. I did not resent the questions. After what I had seen, I wanted somebody to ask them. The only part that made my stomach tighten was watching Emma listen. "Am I going to your house?" she asked. "For now," I said. "Is Mom coming?" "Not tonight." She lowered her eyes to the hospital blanket pooled over her knees. She did not argue. That was worse. I had been in practical emergencies before. I knew how to make lists, cancel meetings, find pajamas at 6 in the morning, move a booster seat from one car to another. I knew how to text my boss that I would not be in, and how to call Emma's school before the attendance line opened. Those were all problems with edges. I could solve them. By 9 that morning, those practical decisions had already changed the shape of my week. I emailed my branch manager, moved 2 meetings, called Emma's school, and explained only that there had been a family emergency, and she was temporarily with me. I put my name on the pickup list through the process Dana gave me, and found the spare key to my townhome that Melissa normally kept. None of it felt like becoming a parent. It felt like building a bridge over the next 24 hours. But each small task made one fact harder to avoid. Until Melissa could care for her daughter again, Emma's ordinary life, breakfast, school, clean clothes, bedtime belonged to my hands. The problem sitting beside me did not have edges. Emma came home with me after sunrise, carrying nothing but the clothes the hospital had found for her. Melissa's phone sealed in a property bag until police finished what they needed from it, and a paper cup with a lid. She fell asleep in my car before I had driven 3 blocks. At my townhome, I put her in the spare room. It had always been half guest room, half storage room, with a quilt my mother had made and a dresser that contained more batteries, extension cords, and old tax folders than clothing. I cleared the nightstand, set a glass of water beside the bed, and left the door open. Emma slept until nearly noon. When she woke, she came downstairs silently enough that I did not hear her until I turned from the kitchen counter and found her standing in the doorway. I had made toast, scrambled eggs, and sliced strawberries, partly because I did not know what she would want, and partly because cooking gave my hands something to do. I told her there was food on the table and more in the refrigerator if she was still hungry later. She stared at the strawberries. Then she looked at me. "Can I have some?" The question was so ordinary that I almost answered it without thinking. Then I remembered the crackers in my car, the way she had folded the wrapper into a square. "Of course, I made them for you." She picked up 1 strawberry and waited. "You can have as many as you want." She took a second one. I sat across from her and made myself stop watching. Children notice when adults study them. I did not want her to feel as if she had traded one room full of rules for another. At the time, I told myself her caution was shock. She had spent the night trapped, hungry and frightened beside an unconscious mother. Any child might need reassurance before taking food in a strange kitchen. I did not turn it into evidence. I did not ask whether she always had to request permission to eat. That question belonged to adults who knew how to ask children about frightening things without putting answers into their mouths. My job that morning was breakfast. She ate the eggs after the strawberries, then asked if we could call Mom. We could not yet. Melissa was still sleeping much of the time, and the hospital asked us to wait until she was alert enough for a brief call or visit. Emma accepted the answer, but she carried my phone from room to room as if the hospital might call only once and give up if she did not reach it in time. That afternoon, Dana Pierce introduced herself by phone. She was in her early 50s, with the calm, unhurried voice of someone who had learned that people in crisis often stopped listening when you gave them 6 instructions at once. She explained only what changed our immediate situation. Emma would remain with me while Melissa was hospitalized and while the agency assessed what had happened. Dana would be the ongoing caseworker after the emergency intake. She was not a judge and did not pretend to be one. If formal orders became necessary, that would happen through the proper process. For the moment, I needed to keep Emma with me, make sure Ryan did not have contact with her, and notify Dana if Melissa or anyone else tried to change the arrangement on their own. Ryan did not call me. I was grateful for that. Police had located him, and I learned only the pieces I was actually entitled to know. He was no longer at Melissa's house. The investigation was active, and the broken window in the room had been documented. Nobody handed me his interview. Nobody needed to. I had seen enough with my own eyes to know that whatever explanation he gave would have to exist beside a physical latch mounted outside a 7-year-old's bedroom. Melissa became alert enough to speak with me on the second hospital day. I had prepared myself for tears, fear, even anger. I had not prepared myself for how small she looked. Her hair had been washed around the dried blood, leaving the swelling at her temple more visible. She was sitting partly upright, moving carefully, with a plastic basin within reach, because nausea still came in waves. The room lights were dimmed. Her voice sounded like hers and not like hers, slower around the edges. The first thing she asked was, "Where's Emma?" "With me." Her eyes closed. Relief moved across her face so plainly that I felt guilty for every angry thought I had had since the night before. "Is she okay?" "She's scared. She wants you. She ate. She slept." Melissa started crying before I finished. Not dramatic sobbing. Tears simply slipped sideways toward her ears while she lay against the pillow. I took her hand. For a few minutes, neither of us said Ryan's name. Then Melissa whispered, "I was leaving." Those 3 words fit perfectly with the bag I had seen, and I believed them without hesitation. She told me the argument had started before Emma's bedtime and worsened when Melissa said she was taking Emma out of the house. Ryan had stood between her and the front door. Melissa remembered trying to get around him, remembered his hand closing around her arm, remembered being forced backward toward the hallway. The next part came in pieces. The dresser, a flash of pain, being on the floor. Ryan saying her name. Emma crying. Melissa trying to sit and telling Emma she was fine, even though the room kept moving. "Then I threw up," she said, embarrassed by the detail. "That matters, Mel." "I know." "Did he call anyone?" She looked away. That was answer enough. But when I said Ryan had left her there with a head injury and a child locked inside, Melissa flinched not away from Ryan, but from the shape of my sentence. "He panicked," she said. I stared at her. "I'm not saying it was okay. You were unconscious. I wasn't when he left." That stopped me. Melissa explained that after she first hit her head, she had come around. She had been confused, sick and unable to stand properly, but awake enough to answer him. She remembered Ryan saying he was done with the argument and needed to get out before things got worse. She remembered telling him to leave her alone. In Melissa's version, he had taken those words literally. Laura, I'm not defending what he did. It sounded exactly like defending what he did. I did not say that. Not yet. She pressed her fingers to her forehead and winced. He thought I was going to be okay. He locked the door. He wanted everybody separated. Emma was inside with you. I know. And then he left. I know. Her voice broke on the second one. I stopped. The point did not need to be said again. The bolt existed. Emma had been hungry. Melissa had been unable to protect her. Repeating those facts louder would not change them. What did change was my understanding of how Melissa was holding the night in her own mind. She was not denying the actions. She was arguing about intention. Ryan had panicked. Ryan had wanted everyone to calm down. Ryan had believed she would wake fully. Those explanations did not erase what happened, but they gave her a way to place the night in a category she could survive. Catastrophe instead of pattern. Panic instead of danger. I still thought that was what shock sounded like. Before I left, she asked if I could bring Emma by when the hospital allowed it. She said the words with such naked need that I promised I would. The visit was short. Emma climbed onto the chair beside Melissa's bed but did not touch her until Melissa held out a hand. Then she pressed both palms around her mother's fingers. I called Aunt Laura, she said immediately. Melissa's face tightened. I know. I used your phone. I know, baby. Emma waited. Melissa pulled her hand closer and kissed her knuckles. You did the right thing. I watched Emma's shoulders drop. It was a small moment, but it mattered. Whatever else had happened, my sister gave her daughter the answer she needed. Later that day, Melissa showed me the message from Ryan. It had arrived before stronger contact restrictions were in place. She did not volunteer it at first. Her phone buzzed on the bedside table while I was helping her find a charger, and I saw his name. Melissa stared at the screen for a long time, before unlocking it and handing it to me. His message was not an apology. It was not a denial either. He wrote that the night had gotten out of control because Melissa was emotional and Emma was hysterical. He said putting distance between everyone had been meant to stop the argument, not hurt anybody. He said Melissa had been conscious when he left, and had told him to go. He said he had no way of knowing she would get worse after he walked out. Then he mentioned me. He said my smashing a window before waiting for police proved exactly how Melissa's family reacted to everything. Turn it into an emergency. Make him the monster. Ask questions later. The message was infuriating because it did not ask anyone to believe nothing happened. It asked for something smaller and more dangerous. Enough ambiguity to argue that the same facts meant something less. Melissa took the phone back. He always says you don't like him. I don't like him. You didn't before this? I didn't know him well enough before this. She almost smiled, but the movement hurt her head. I looked down at the message again. Above it sat months of ordinary exchanges between them. Groceries, pickup times, a broken dishwasher, photos, reminders. Nothing about the thread looked like a villain's archive. In the visible history, one older line from Melissa caught my eye only because Emma's name was in it. Emma had been making everything harder lately. I did not attach meaning to it then. Parents complain. Children have difficult weeks. First grade had just started. I had heard Melissa say similar things aloud when Emma was younger and refusing to sleep. The line passed through my mind as background noise, not evidence. What mattered to me was the message Ryan had just sent. He's trying to make you question what happened, I said. Melissa shook her head slowly. I know what happened. Do you? She looked at me sharply. I regretted the question as soon as I asked it. She was in a hospital bed with a brain injury, and I was already turning her into somebody I needed to cross-examine. That was not my role, So I changed the thing I could actually control. I'm going to help you, I said. You get better. We keep him away from the house. Emma stays with me until they're satisfied she can go back safely. Then I help you get her home. Melissa's eyes filled again. You mean that? Yes. At that point I did. My plan seemed straightforward, because I still believed the danger had a single name. Remove Ryan from the house. Give Melissa time to recover. Cooperate with whatever safety steps were required. Get Emma back into her own bedroom with her mother. I had spent my whole life believing that when people I loved were hurt, my job was to help rebuild what had been damaged. I did not yet see that sometimes rebuilding the old arrangement was the dangerous thing. Melissa was discharged after roughly 48 hours with strict instructions to rest, avoid driving, return for worsening symptoms, and follow up as directed. She was not ready to resume normal life, and nobody treated her as if she were. Emma remained with me. Dana checked in. The school excused a few days. I moved some of my work home and learned that 7-year-olds could ask the same questions 6 ways without repeating the same words. When can I see Mom? Is Mom sleeping at home? When Mom feels better, do I go back? Can I take my purple lunchbox when I go home? I answered carefully and consistently. Mom was healing. Emma was staying with me for now. The grown-ups were making a plan. By the 3rd evening, my townhome had begun to look as if a child actually lived there. A toothbrush in the downstairs bathroom. Crayons on my dining table. A pair of borrowed sneakers by the door. Emma's world had been moved in pieces, because most of her things were still at Melissa's house. Melissa called while Emma was in the shower. Could you get her some clothes tomorrow? She asked. School stuff too. She'll need her inhaler spacer, and she'll want her own pajamas. Of course. The house should be cleared for you to pick things up. I can tell you where everything is. I thought again of the front entry. The purse, the flats, the duffel bag with Emma's jacket caught under the handle. You already packed half of it, I said. There was a pause so slight I did not recognize it as anything important. I'll bring the duffel bag too, I told her. Melissa was quiet for another second. Then she said, Okay. The next morning, I woke before my alarm because someone was standing beside my bed. Emma did not say my name. She simply stood there in pink borrowed pajamas, with her hair flattened on one side, and waited for me to notice her. For one startled second, I was back in Melissa's hallway, looking at the bolt outside the bedroom door. Then I saw the book tucked under Emma's arm and the strip of sunlight beneath my curtains. Morning, I said. Mom called. I reached for my phone. There was no missed call. Emma pointed toward the hallway. On the house phone. I had forgotten I still owned a landline. Melissa had called while Emma was downstairs getting water, and they had spoken for less than 5 minutes. I found out later that Dana had approved the contact under the temporary plan, as long as Emma was not coached about the incident. What mattered to Emma was simpler. Her mother sounded tired, but she was home. She had slept in her own bed. She had eaten toast. She had told Emma she loved her. That changed the temperature of the entire morning. For the first time since the midnight call, Emma moved through my townhome with purpose instead of waiting to be told what happened next. She chose cereal instead of eggs. She reminded me her purple lunchbox was still at home. She asked whether she could go back to school the next day. Then, while I was rinsing a bowl, she asked the question I had known was coming. If Mom is home, when do I go home? I dried my hands and turned around. Not today. Her face fell fast enough to make me feel cruel. Why? Because your mom is still getting better, and there are a few things the grown-ups have to make sure are safe first. Ryan isn't there. The certainty in her voice surprised me. Not because she defended him. She did not. She said his name the way a child might name bad weather that had moved out of town. I know. So the house is okay. I almost answered too quickly. In my mind, that was still the plan. Ryan gone, Melissa recovering, Emma home. But the decision was not mine alone, and I did not want to teach Emma that promises were something adults made because a child looked sad. I think everyone is working toward that, I said. But you stay with me until we're told it's time. She frowned at the floor. For 3 days, every adult around Emma had used words like temporary, safety, assessment, and plan. To me, they described procedure. To her, they meant she could not sleep in her own room. She had not asked to be rescued into a different life. She had called because she was hungry and her mother would not wake up. The rescue had solved those 2 immediate problems. It had also carried her out of the only home she knew. That was the first time I understood that keeping a child safe could feel, to the child, like taking something away. Dana called before lunch. The facts that mattered had shifted since the hospital. Ryan was no longer living at Melissa's house. Conditions tied to the active case kept him away from Emma and the residents. Melissa was cooperating with the child safety plan and had told Dana she intended to end the relationship. There were still questions to answer, but the immediate physical danger looked more containable than it had 48 hours earlier. I asked the only question I cared about. If Ryan stays out and Melissa keeps improving, are we talking about days? Weeks? Dana did not promise a date. She told me the agency would look at Melissa's medical stability, the safety of the home, and whether the separation from Ryan was credible and enforceable. She also needed to know what I was seeing from Emma. I told her the truth as I understood it then. Emma was sleeping, eating, asking for her mother. She had been cautious about food the first morning, but I believed that could be shock. She had not disclosed some hidden history to me, and I had not asked her to. Mostly she wanted normal things back. Then I said something I would later remember word for word. If he's really gone and Melissa can manage at home, I would support Emma going back. Dana paused. Not dramatically. She simply said she had heard me, and would note that I was willing to support reunification when it was safe. I felt lighter after the call. That is difficult to admit now, because I know what came next. But at the time, I believed we had reached the part of a crisis, where the path forward could be made orderly. Ryan had removed himself from the house. Melissa had survived without surgery. Emma was with family instead of a stranger. The system was watching. Nothing about that felt easy, but it felt solvable. Melissa called soon after. Her voice was steadier than it had been in the hospital, though she still tired quickly. She said she had taken another pain-free nap, kept breakfast down, and had a follow-up scheduled. Then she told me, without my asking, that Ryan would not be moving back in. "I'm done," she said. I wanted those 2 words to close a door. "Good. I mean it, Laura." "I know. You don't sound like you know." I leaned against my kitchen counter. "I watched paramedics carry you out of Emma's bedroom. It may take me more than a couple of days to sound normal about any of this." She went quiet. I did not press her. I had promised myself after the hospital that I would stop interrogating my sister when my real job was helping her stand back up. "I talked to Dana," I said. "I told her if you keep him out and you're medically okay, I'll support Emma coming home." Melissa exhaled so hard I heard it through the phone. "Thank you." The relief in her voice confirmed my belief that we were on the same side. She wanted her daughter back. I wanted Emma with her mother. Ryan was the obstruction between those 2 things. Remove him, and the rest was repair. That afternoon, Emma finally agreed to return to school. The following day. The decision came after I told her we could drive by Melissa's street after pickup if Dana had no objection not to stop, just so she could see the house still existed exactly where she had left it. She did not take me up on the offer. Instead, she asked if Mom could come get her herself when it was time. "I want her to come," she said. "Not you bring me." There was no accusation in it, which somehow made it sting more. "Okay. You promise?" "I promise that if the adults say it's time and your mom is able to drive, we'll let her come." Emma considered my wording. That's a lot of ifs. I laughed before I could stop myself. She did not. Then she said, "I want my room, I know. My glow stars are there. I know. And my pillow. Yours is too fat. That is a serious problem. This time she smiled, but only briefly. The exchange left me with a new kind of unease. I had thought of my townhome as safety, and physically it was. But Emma did not experience safety as a concept. She experienced it as being somewhere other than home. If I wanted to protect her without becoming another adult who made decisions over her head, I had to remember that difference. The following morning, after dropping Emma at school, I called Melissa before going to her house. She confirmed police had released the residents from immediate scene processing and that I had her permission to collect Emma's things. She gave me a short list: pajamas, school clothes, purple lunchbox, hairbrush, inhaler spacer, sneakers, the stuffed rabbit Emma slept with when she was sick. And the duffel, I reminded her. There was a pause. Not long enough to alarm me. Yes, Melissa said. Bring that too. I drove over expecting the house to feel different in daylight. It did, but not in the way I expected. The broken side window had been boarded over. There was a strip of police tape discarded in a trash can near the driveway, but otherwise the house looked insultingly ordinary. The hydrangea by the porch needed water. A grocery flyer had been shoved halfway through the mailbox. Someone's sprinkler misted the corner of Melissa's lawn. Inside, morning sun crossed the hardwood floor in rectangles I had seen 100 times. I stood in the entry for a moment with Melissa's key in my hand and hated the normality of it. On the night of the rescue, I had entered through broken glass with sirens behind me. Now the refrigerator hummed. A clock ticked above the stove. There was an unopened package on the dining table. I had no intention of searching the house. That mattered to me. I was there because Melissa had asked me to collect Emma's belongings, not because I had appointed myself detective. Police had photographed what they needed. Child welfare professionals had their role. My job was clothes, school supplies, and one stuffed rabbit. I went to Emma's room last. The hallway bolt was still there because the police had documented it in place, though it now sat open. I avoided looking at it longer than necessary. Inside, the room had been cleaned only enough to remove the medical mess. The dresser still stood where Melissa had struck it. One drawer was half open. I found Emma's rabbit under the bed. Her pajamas were in the second drawer. Her purple lunchbox was on a hook in the kitchen. I put everything into 2 reusable grocery bags because I remembered the duffel was already packed near the front door. When I returned to the entry, the bag was exactly where I had seen it that night. Zipped. Bulging. Emma's denim jacket still caught under one handle. In daylight, it looked even more persuasive. Melissa's purse was no longer beside it. Police had returned her personal items through the proper process, and she had taken them after discharge. But I remembered the original arrangement perfectly. Bag, purse, shoes, front door. I could almost reconstruct the moment I had imagined. Melissa quietly packing while Ryan was somewhere else in the house, gathering Emma's things first because children needed more than adults, planning to grab her own essentials at the last second. I lifted the bag. It was heavier than I expected. That made me strangely happy. Not because of the weight itself, because every pound felt like proof that Melissa had been serious. She had not merely threatened Ryan during an argument. She had packed enough to take Emma somewhere else. In the car, I placed the duffel beside the bags I had filled and drove back to my townhome with a confidence I had not felt since the call. By then, I had already begun imagining the next week. Melissa's follow-up appointment. Maybe another meeting with Dana. The locks changed if necessary. A few nights where Emma stayed with me while Melissa regained strength. Then perhaps a gradual return. I even caught myself thinking about how I would explain the transition to my branch manager. One more week working partly from home, maybe. Then school pickup would go back to Melissa. The spare room would become a spare room again. That thought brought relief, and something else I did not want to name. I had begun to get used to the sound of Emma moving around my townhome. The contradiction was simple. I wanted her safe, and I wanted my sister to have her daughter back. I did not want to become necessary. Emma came home from school tired and irritable. She dropped her backpack by my door, then immediately asked whether I had gone to her house. I did. Did you get Bunny? I held up the stuffed rabbit. She took it with both hands and pressed its worn face against her cheek. Lunchbox? Kitchen. My blue pajamas? Yes. My sparkly shoes? I hesitated. I got your sneakers. The sparkly ones are under Mom's bed. I told her I could get them another time. Maybe Mom can bring them when I go home, she said. There it was again. When, not if. I did not correct her. That evening, Melissa called during dinner. She asked Emma about school and listened to a long description of a classmate who had spilled milk during lunch. Emma sounded almost ordinary. When Melissa said she missed her, Emma said, I can come when Aunt Laura says. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. That's not what I said, I told her gently. Emma looked confused. Melissa rescued the moment before it became something heavier. Aunt Laura doesn't decide by herself, she said. There are people helping us make sure everything's okay. Emma accepted that, though not happily. After the call, she pushed 2 peas around her plate. You said you wanted me to go home. I do. Then why can't I? Because wanting something and knowing it's ready are different. She stared at me with the exhausted suspicion of a child who had discovered grown-ups could turn any answer into more waiting. You're on Mom's side, right? The question caught me off guard. Yes. And mine? Always. She nodded. But I realized the 2 answers might not always point in the same direction. At 8:30, I sent Emma upstairs for her shower and decided to deal with the clothes I had brought from the house. I wanted everything washed before she wore it. Not because it was dirty exactly. I simply needed a task, and laundry was a task with a beginning and an end. The 2 grocery bags were easy. School shirts, socks, pajamas. The rabbit stayed with Emma. Then I dragged the duffel onto the dining table. For the first time, I was going to open it. I remember how little drama the moment had. No ominous music in my head. No suspicion. I was thinking about detergent and whether Melissa had packed enough underwear for a week. The zipper caught halfway around one corner, then released. The first thing I saw was Emma's yellow sweatshirt. Under it were 2 pairs of jeans, leggings, t-shirts rolled tightly, underwear, socks, and pajamas. Melissa had packed neatly. More neatly than I would have if I had been trying to get out of a dangerous house quickly. I still did not question it. Children needed clothes. I pulled out a toiletry pouch, Emma's toothbrush, kid toothpaste, hair ties, a small detangling brush. Next came the inhaler spacer Melissa had asked me to retrieve. It was already in the bag. I set it beside the toothbrush and hair ties. Another reminder that this had been packed with Emma's ordinary needs in mind. There were school supplies near the bottom. A folder, crayons, the reading log Emma's teacher had sent home, 2 pencils in a plastic case, her favorite bedtime book, the small stuffed owl she sometimes carried in the car, a charger for the tablet Emma used on long trips. I emptied the bag slowly. Then I looked inside again. Nothing. I checked the side pocket. A child's lip balm. Tissues. 2 granola bars. No adult clothing. I opened the narrow front compartment. Emma's allergy card and a photocopy of her insurance information. No Melissa toiletries. No phone charger for Melissa. No medication. No second pair of women's shoes. No documents that belonged to my sister. I stared at the pile spread across my dining table. The explanation came automatically. Melissa had packed Emma first. Of course she had. Maybe she planned to throw her own things into another bag at the last minute. Maybe there was a suitcase in her bedroom I had not noticed because I had not searched. Maybe the argument started before she finished. All plausible. I wanted one of them to be true. I folded the yellow sweatshirt and put it back in the bag. Then I stopped. If Melissa had been planning to leave that night, why had she packed Emma's school folder and insurance copy, but not one shirt for herself? I took everything out again. This time, I was not searching for a hidden clue. I was checking my own assumption. Emma's things. Only Emma's things. I remembered the bag beside the door on the night of the rescue, Melissa's purse nearby, her flats. I had turned those three objects into a complete story because I needed the story to be true. Bag meant escape. Purse meant Melissa. Shoes meant leaving. But a purse beside a front door was normal. So were shoes. The bag was the only thing that had actually been packed, and every item inside belonged to Emma. The confidence I had carried home from Melissa's house drained out of me. I sat at the dining table with Emma's clothes around me and heard the shower turn off upstairs. I did not call Dana. I did not ask Emma. I did not drive back to the house looking for another suitcase. There was one person who could answer the question, and anything else would have been me building theories around a child's belongings. I called Melissa. She answered after the fourth ring. "Hey, is Emma okay?" "She's fine." "What's wrong?" I looked at the empty duffel on my table, then at the neat piles around it. I asked the only question that mattered. "Where were your things?" For several seconds, all I heard was Melissa breathing. She did not answer. I could picture her at her kitchen table with the curtains half drawn, because bright light still bothered her head, moving carefully around the house she had returned to without Emma. I had spent the past 3 days telling myself, her hesitation came from injury, exhaustion, shock. This silence was different. It had shape. "Melissa," I said, "where were your things?" She exhaled slowly. "Laura, don't do this over the phone." "Then tell me I'm wrong." Another silence. I looked at the duffel bag spread open on my dining table. Emma's yellow sweatshirt, her reading folder, her toothbrush, her allergy card, her inhaler spacer, 2 granola bars in the side pocket. Everything a parent might pack if a child were going somewhere for more than a night. Nothing a woman would pack if she were leaving her own home. Melissa finally said, "The bag was for Emma." The sentence landed without drama. No shouting, no denial, just 6 words that changed the meaning of an object I had been using to defend my sister in my own mind. "What do you mean for Emma?" "I mean exactly that. Ryan thought it would help if she stayed with you for a little while." "Help what?" "Our relationship." My anger came cold. Precise. Melissa started explaining before I asked another question. Ryan had been saying for weeks that every disagreement in the house eventually became about Emma. Bedtime, school mornings, messes, interrupted plans, whether the 2 adults ever had time without a child between them. He framed my house as a temporary reset. A few days at first, maybe a week or 2. Emma liked me. I had a spare room. I was family. No one was suggesting anything permanent. "And you agreed?" I said. "I agreed to think about it." "You packed a bag." "I know what I did. That stopped me. Not because it excused her, but because she had finally said something without making Ryan's intentions the center of it. Melissa told me she had not called me yet, because she had not decided how to ask. She had imagined saying she needed a break after the first week of school, that Emma might enjoy a few days with me, that she and Ryan needed quiet after a difficult month. Every version sounded ordinary if you left out the real reason. "You were going to ask me to take your daughter so you could fix things with the man who thought your daughter was the problem." Her voice tightened. "I was going to ask my sister to let her niece stay somewhere she loves for a little while." "That is not the same sentence." "No," she said. "It isn't." Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Emma was moving around after her shower. I lowered my voice. Did she know? "She saw the bag. Melissa said she had packed it earlier that evening." Emma noticed her denim jacket caught under the handle and asked whether they were going somewhere. Melissa told her she might stay with me for a little while. Emma asked why. Melissa gave her the soft answer. Aunt Laura missed her. It could be fun. Mom and Ryan needed a little grown-up time. Then Emma looked at the bag and asked, "Am I going to Auntie's because he doesn't want me here?" Melissa's voice broke. I stopped thinking about the plan as an adult argument and pictured the actual child inside it. 7 years old, first week of first grade. Her clothes packed, toothbrush tucked into a pouch, school folder already inside the bag, trying to understand why she was the one being moved. Melissa said she denied it immediately. Of course, Ryan wanted her there. Everybody loved her. It was temporary. Emma did not argue. She only said okay, picked up Bunny, and went to her room. That was what undid Melissa. She followed a few minutes later and found Emma sitting on the edge of her bed with the rabbit against her stomach. Emma asked whether Mom was staying at the house with Ryan while she went to mine. Melissa said yes. Then Emma asked, "So I'm the one leaving?" The sentence did what every adult argument had failed to do. Melissa told me she suddenly heard her own plan, without all the words that had made it reasonable. Not respite, not a reset, not giving everyone space. Her 7-year-old daughter was being sent out of her home because the adult relationship worked better when she was not there. That's when I told her no, Melissa said. I told her she wasn't going anywhere without me. I looked toward the stairs. Emma had never explained any of this to me. She had not needed to. The bag had. Melissa said she went back to Ryan and told him the arrangement was off. He called her emotional, reminded her she had already packed, accused her of letting one question from a child undo a reasonable plan. Melissa told him Emma was not the problem, and she was done pretending she was. Then she said, "I told him we were both leaving." The night rearranged itself in my head. The physical facts did not change. Ryan blocking the exit, Melissa being forced backward, the dresser, the exterior bolt, the empty driveway. But the cause immediately before them was different from what I had imagined. Melissa had not spent days secretly preparing to escape with Emma. She had spent days moving toward a compromise that removed Emma instead. Only after her daughter heard the compromise and named what it meant did Melissa reverse course. The crisis happened because my sister finally chose Emma, but she chose her after nearly choosing Ryan. Both things were true. Why did you tell me at the hospital I was leaving and let me think the bag was yours too? Because I was leaving. You knew what I thought. She did not answer. That was the moment my loyalty stopped feeling simple. I had told Dana Ryan was the obstacle. I had told Emma everyone was working toward home. I had promised Melissa I would help her get her daughter back. All of it rested on a picture that no longer existed. "I need to call Dana," I said. Melissa's voice changed. "Why?" "Because I told her I would support Emma coming home soon if Ryan stayed out. He is staying out. That isn't the only thing I know anymore." Laura. There was fear in the way she said my name, and my old instinct answered it. For years, that tone had meant help me contain this. Help me find the version that hurts least. I almost did. Then I looked at Emma's insurance copy beside a child's lip balm. Melissa said, "I made a terrible decision. Then I fixed it." "You changed your mind?" "Yes. Because Emma asked if Ryan didn't want her." "Yes. You want me to treat the first choice like it disappeared because the second one was better." "That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I almost made a mistake. I didn't go through with it. And the thing I did instead put me in the hospital. How much more do you want me punished for changing my mind?" That reached the part of me that still saw the swelling at her temple. I did not want Melissa punished. I wanted her healthy. I wanted Emma home. I wanted Ryan gone. I wanted the story to return to the clean shape I had given it. But wanting those things did not make me entitled to tell Dana something I no longer believed. "I'm not calling to punish you. Yesterday I told her I thought Ryan was the only thing between Emma and a safe return. I can't say that now. You think I'm unsafe? I think you were willing to move Emma out of her own house to save that relationship. For a few days. The duration doesn't change the reason. She would have been with you. That makes me safe. It doesn't make the choice safe. She hung up. I stayed at the table with the silent phone in my hand. A few minutes later, Emma came downstairs in clean pajamas, hair wet down her back, and saw the contents of the duffel spread across the table. My stuff. I was getting it ready for the wash. She picked up the small stuffed owl. Mom packed this. I did not ask when. I did not ask why. I had promised myself I would not turn Emma into a source of proof. Do you want the owl upstairs? She nodded, then looked at the bag with simple recognition. Can I have my yellow sweatshirt tomorrow? Absolutely. That was all. After she went upstairs, I called Dana. I gave her no theory. I told her the facts in the smallest possible form. Melissa had admitted the duffel was for Emma alone. Ryan had suggested Emma stay with me temporarily so the adults could work on their relationship. Melissa agreed far enough to pack the child's things. Emma's question about being sent away because Ryan did not want her caused Melissa to reverse the plan. Only then did Melissa decide they would leave together. Dana listened and asked one question. Does this change what you told me this morning about supporting a near-term return? I hated how cleanly she asked it. Yes. The word cost me something as soon as I said it. Not custody, not victory. Something more immediate. It removed my support from the path home I had been helping build. I can't honestly tell you I think Ryan being gone solves the safety question, I said. Not yet. Dana did not praise me or condemn Melissa. She said the new information would be included in the assessment and Emma's current placement would remain while Melissa's protective judgment and safety planning were evaluated. The call lasted less than 10 minutes. Dana also asked whether I could continue the kinship placement if for now became longer than the few days I had originally imagined. That question made the consequence concrete in a way the assessment language had not. I looked toward the spare room. Emma's borrowed clothes were draped over the chair. Her reading sheet was clipped to my refrigerator. My work laptop was open on the dining counter because I had been taking calls between school pickup and dinner. Yes, I said. I did not say it lightly. My bank had been generous about remote work for a family emergency, but generosity was not an endless schedule. I would need a more stable arrangement for school pickup. I would need to clear the spare dresser properly, instead of treating Emma's stay like a weekend visit. I would need to stop planning my life around a date nobody had promised. Dana said we would handle practical supports as the plan developed. Then she repeated that extending Emma's stay was not a judgment that Melissa could never parent safely. It meant the agency did not yet have enough reason to reverse the placement. After we hung up, I carried the old tax folders out of the spare room dresser and stacked them in my office closet. It was the first thing I did that admitted Emma might not be leaving at the end of the week. She wandered in while I was making space. Why are you moving that stuff? So your clothes don't have to live in bags. She considered that answer. Just until I go home? Yes, I said. Just so you have somewhere for them while you're here. I did not know whether the sentence reassured her or me. Nothing else in my townhome changed. Emma's backpack was still by the door. Her water was still on the coffee table. The dishwasher still needed unloading. But the future I had been imagining had moved farther away. The next morning, Melissa called before 7. You told them? Yes. You couldn't give me one day to talk to you? You did talk to me. She said Dana had explained that the kinship arrangement would continue, while they looked more closely at whether Melissa could make and maintain protective decisions without someone else forcing the issue. She repeated the language as though it had been invented to insult her. Ryan is not coming back, she said. I told everybody that. I believe you mean it. Then, what exactly are you waiting for? I thought of the bag. I'm waiting to believe Emma will never again be the person moved out of the way when your relationship becomes difficult. That's cruel. It hurt because I knew how it sounded. Melissa was recovering from a brain injury. She was alone in a house with a boarded window and a police photograph of a bolt outside her daughter's room. Ryan was excluded. She wanted Emma home. From her side, I was the sister who had promised help and then used a confession against her. I'm not trying to take Emma from you. That is exactly what people say when they're helping keep a child from her mother. I am keeping the promise I made to protect her. You promised me too. There it was. I had promised Melissa I would help her get Emma home. I had promised Emma I was on her side. For 3 days those promises had seemed identical. Now they were not. I can't fix this by telling Dana something I don't believe. Melissa laughed once, without humor. You always get to be the responsible one, don't you? You show up with your lists and your spare room, and suddenly I'm the irresponsible sister again. This isn't about who is the better sister. No. Now it's about who gets to decide whether I'm a good enough mother. That isn't my decision. But your opinion matters, and you know it. She was right. That was why my call mattered. I told them what you told me. I didn't ask them to keep Emma here forever. I said I could no longer support sending her home immediately just because Ryan is gone. That one bag does not make me dangerous. No. Then what does? I almost answered with every behavior I had noticed in Emma. The permission, seeking, the folded wrapper, the automatic okay. But none of those things, by themselves, proved what Melissa had done or known. Listing them would only make the argument larger. So I stayed with what had actually changed. The bag tells me you were willing to solve an adult problem by relocating Emma. She was going to stay with you, not strangers. And that is why you were able to call it safe. Silence. Melissa finally said she heard what I meant. I thought she had almost chosen Ryan. I told her yes almost, and that I also believed she had chosen Emma that night. The question was whether she could keep choosing Emma after the emergency was over. She started crying. Every instinct I had wanted to soften that answer, but I did not, and she ended the call without saying goodbye. Later that afternoon, Dana confirmed the practical consequence. The current placement would continue. No dramatic hearing. No declaration that Melissa was unfit. Emma would remain with me, while Melissa worked through a fuller safety assessment and plan. A week earlier, I would have called that a victory over Ryan. Now it felt like a loss inside my own family. Melissa stopped contacting me, except about Emma's schedule, school, and approved calls. Her messages became short and precise. What time is pickup? Did she finish her reading sheet? Can I call at 7? Did she take her spacer to school? I answered every question. I did not force intimacy back into the spaces between them. 2 days later, I took Emma to a scheduled visit with Melissa. When Emma saw her mother, she ran. Melissa lowered herself carefully to one knee and held her. No one watching could have doubted they loved each other. That made the decisions harder, not easier. When the visit ended, Emma cried and asked why she could not go home with Mom now. Melissa looked at me over Emma's head. For 1 second, I thought she might say I was the reason. She did not. She told Emma the adults were still making sure everything was ready. On the drive back, Emma was quiet. Then she asked, "Did Mom do something bad?" "Your mom made some choices the grown-ups have to fix." "Like Ryan?" "No, not like Ryan." That mattered. I would not flatten them into the same person, because both had failed her differently. Emma pressed her forehead to the window. Mom changed her mind. "Yes, she said I wasn't going away." "That's right. She came to my room and said we were both leaving. I did not ask for more. Melissa had already told me what the bag meant, and I was not going to use Emma to validate an adult account." "Your mom told me that too." Emma nodded. Then she said, "She knew I could wait." I glanced at her. "What do you mean?" Her shoulders rose. "Nothing. I could have pressed. I did not." That evening, Melissa called about the next visit. The conversation stayed practical until I mentioned Emma had been sad after leaving. "This separation is hurting her," Melissa said. "I know. She wants to be home." "I know." "Then why are we still doing this? You're treating one terrible decision like it proves I can't protect my own child." I thought of Emma saying, "She knew I could wait." "I don't know what it proves yet." Melissa made an exhausted sound. "Laura, you weren't there for everything." "No. You don't know how hard things had gotten." "No. You don't know what I did to keep fights from getting worse." That made me sit straighter. "What do you mean?" Melissa hesitated. Then, trying to defend herself, she said the words that opened the next door. "Emma knew what to do when Ryan got like that." Melissa had meant the sentence as a defense. By the time it settled between us, it sounded like a routine. I had heard Melissa say terrible things in the previous week without seeming to understand what they meant until they were already out in the room. The bag had been one of them. This was different. The sentence contained a routine. "What do you mean? She knew what to do?" Melissa did not answer right away. I could hear the faint clink of something on her end. Probably the mug she had been carrying everywhere since the hospital, because bending down still made her head throb. When she spoke again, her voice had lost the sharpness from a minute earlier. "On bad nights, if Ryan and I were arguing, I'd send Emma to her room. That is not the same thing as what happened that night." "I know. Then what did she know?" Another pause. "She knows she's supposed to stay there until he cools down." I did not breathe. "She knows?" Melissa heard it too. I could tell from the silence that followed. Not the silence of someone refusing a question. The silence of someone who had finally listened to her own sentence. For days, I had been asking myself whether one packed bag proved enough to keep Emma away from her mother. I had worried I was taking a bad decision and turning it into a verdict on Melissa's entire ability to parent. What she had just said changed the question. Emma had not learned how to wait quietly behind a door on the night I broke the window. She had already known how. I went back in my mind to the call at 12:07. The way she whispered, the way she accepted every instruction with that small automatic okay, the way she had conserved water beside an unconscious mother, the way she had looked down the hallway before running into my arms after I opened the bolt. I had treated those things as the behavior of a terrified child improvising through one impossible night. Now I understood that at least part of what I had seen was not improvisation. It was practice. I did not say any of that to Melissa. The conclusion did not need a speech. I asked her for the beginning. She told me there had never been a formal rule announced at the dinner table. Ryan had not moved into the house and declared that Emma would be confined whenever he was angry. That would have been easier to recognize. What happened instead came in increments small enough to survive one at a time. At first, when arguments between the adults became too loud, Melissa sent Emma to her bedroom because she did not want her listening. That part sounded ordinary. Plenty of parents moved a child away from an adult disagreement. Then Ryan began deciding when Emma could come back out. He would say he needed everyone to stop circling him. He would complain that Emma appearing in the hallway, asking whether Mom was okay or whether dinner was ready, kept the fight alive. Melissa said she started telling Emma to stay in her room a few more minutes. Wait until things settled. Give Ryan space. Do not come out just because you heard voices get quiet. The first time Emma came out anyway, Ryan sent her back. Melissa objected. Ryan apologized later. There was a calmer week. Then, another argument happened. That was the pattern Melissa described, and she did not need to give me 20 examples. The meaning was in the progression. Something that began as a mother, moving her daughter away from an argument, became a household expectation that the child would remove herself until the adult man decided the emotional weather was safe again. Was the bolt used before? I asked. Melissa answered carefully. Not like that night. The phrase was not a denial. I made myself stay precise. Was Emma ever locked in her room before? Sometimes the door was kept shut. That's not what I asked. Not for hours. Not with me unconscious. Not with nobody there. I closed my eyes. Again. She was measuring the earlier behavior against the worst possible version of it. Shorter. Supervised. No head injury. No abandonment. In Melissa's mind, those differences had allowed every earlier incident to remain beneath the line marked dangerous. What did you tell Emma when she wanted to come out? Melissa's answer came low. I told her not to make it worse. I pressed my thumb against the edge of the kitchen table. There it was. Not a conspiracy. Not some secret plan she and Ryan had designed together. Something more common and more painful. A mother trying so hard to manage one adult's anger that she taught her child how to accommodate it. Melissa started crying, but she kept talking. She said Ryan was not cruel every day. Some weekends he made pancakes shaped like animals for Emma. He fixed the loose railing on the back steps. He once spent an hour assembling a school project display when Melissa was exhausted after work. After an argument, he could be attentive for days, sometimes weeks. He would admit he had gone too far, say work was crushing him, promise the house would be calmer. Each apology gave Melissa a new reason to treat the previous incident as finished. Each calm stretch made the next one look temporary. And because Emma still went to school, still laughed at cartoons, still climbed into Melissa's bed on Saturday mornings, Melissa let normal moments argue against the bad ones. I thought I was keeping things from escalating, she said. I believed that she had thought it. That was the frightening part. The danger was no longer only that Melissa had loved Ryan enough to make one terrible compromise. It was that she had spent months redefining compromise as protection. I remembered Emma asking permission for strawberries in my kitchen after I had already told her the food was for her. I remembered the folded cracker wrapper. I remembered the way she had said, I saved some for Mom. About half a bottle of water when there was a whole kitchen on the other side of a door she could not open. None of those behaviors proved a single specific event. I still would not turn them into evidence, but they no longer floated without context. They belonged to a child who had learned that ordinary needs could wait until the adults were calm. Melissa said, I know how this sounds. No, I said. I don't think you did until now. She was quiet. I softened my tone, not the fact. When you told me Emma knew what to do, you were trying to prove you had a system, but the system required a 7-year-old to manage Ryan's moods. I was trying to keep her away from the fights. And then she learned the fights decided when she could eat, when she could come out, when she could ask for you. That wasn't supposed to happen. I know, for the first time since the bag conversation, Melissa did not accuse me of judging her. She sounded tired in a deeper way than the head injury had made her tired. She said, I kept thinking the next version was the last version. I understood that too. People rarely wake up and decide they will accept something unbearable. They accept something only slightly worse than yesterday. Then they build language around it. Then a new yesterday arrives. But understanding how she got there did not make Emma safer. The next day, Dana came to my townhome for a scheduled check-in. Emma was at school. That mattered, because I did not want the child sitting in the next room while adults discussed whether her mother could have her back. Dana sat at my dining table with the same calm expression she brought to everything. She did not ask me to retell the rescue. She did not ask for theories about Ryan. She asked, what had changed since our last conversation? So I told her. I said Melissa had explained that on earlier bad nights, Emma was expected to stay in her room until Ryan cooled down. I gave Dana the exact sentence Melissa had used. I said Melissa acknowledged, telling Emma not to make things worse. I did not claim every earlier separation involved the exterior bolt because I did not know that. I did not claim Emma had been starved or abandoned before because nobody had told me that. I did not turn caution around food into proof. The facts were enough. Dana asked whether Melissa herself had described this as an established pattern rather than a single prior event. Yes. She wrote something down, then looked at me. The practical question changed immediately. Before, the safety plan had centered on Ryan's absence. Could he enter the house? Could he contact Emma? Was Melissa medically able to care for her? Was the separation credible? Now Dana said they had to assess something different. Whether Melissa could identify unsafe behavior without waiting for Emma or another adult to force the issue, whether she could maintain boundaries even when Ryan apologized or minimized, and whether she understood that asking a child to accommodate adult volatility was itself a protection problem. She did not tell me Melissa was never getting Emma back. She did not tell me to prepare for permanent custody. She told me the current placement would continue while Melissa demonstrated a credible safety plan and protective judgment over time. That distinction should have sounded hopeful. Instead, it felt heavier than anything Dana had said before, because there was no external object to remove now, no man to ban from a driveway, no lock to change. The question had moved inside my sister. Could Melissa recognize danger before Emma had to name it for her? Could she hold a boundary after the emergency stopped being fresh? Could she choose her daughter when choosing her daughter no longer came with sirens and a hospital bracelet? Those were not questions I could answer for her. Dana asked if I understood. I do. Are you still able to keep Emma with you under the current plan? Yes. This time I answered without looking toward the spare room. Over the previous days, I had already rearranged my work schedule, cleared the dresser, put school pickup on my calendar, and stopped counting toward a date when my house would return to normal. None of that made me Emma's mother. It made me the adult responsible for keeping her ordinary life steady, while her mother did work I could not do for her. After Dana left, I stood at the sink and realized how much my role had changed in less than a week. At first, I had been the rescuer. Then I became the temporary aunt with a spare room. Then I became the person helping mother and daughter get back together. Now I had become something harder, the person who had to keep Emma safe while refusing to make Melissa either a monster or an exception. That afternoon, Emma came home with a sticker on her shirt for returning a library book on time. She showed it to me before taking off her backpack. Mom called the school office today, she said. I kept my expression neutral. Did you talk to her? No. Mrs. Klein said Mom asked if I was okay. The call itself was not a violation. Dana had already explained the approved ways Melissa could check in, but Emma's face told me she was measuring something. She misses you, I said. I miss her too. She went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, then stopped with her hand on the door. Can I have yogurt? Yes. She took one without asking which flavor. A week earlier, that small act would have relieved me. That day it hurt, not because it was bad, because progress in my house existed beside separation from hers. At dinner, she asked again why she could not go home if Ryan was gone. I had expected the question, but not the anger under it. He doesn't live there now, she said. Mom said. I know. And Mom said the door thing is gone. I did not ask how Melissa had phrased the door thing. That's good. So why? I could have said because your mother allowed too much. Because adults are worried she might do it again. Because Ryan being gone does not erase what happened before. All of those were adult answers. I gave her the child-sized one. The grown-ups have to make sure home stays safe, not just that it's safe today. Emma pushed a noodle around her plate. Mom is safe. I hope she is. She's my mom. I know. Her eyes filled. Did I make her be in trouble? The question was so quiet that for a moment I thought I had misheard. What? When I called you, did I make trouble for Mom? Every argument between adults disappeared from the room. I moved my chair closer, but did not touch her until she leaned toward me. No, you called because you needed help. The things happening now are because of choices adults made, Not because you called me. But if I didn't call, your mom needed a hospital. Emma looked down. And you needed the door opened, I said. Calling me did not create those things. She wiped her nose with the back of her wrist. Mom cried when she said I did the right thing. She can be sad and still mean it. That seemed to confuse her, which was fair. Adults had spent the entire week proving that more than one thing could be true at once. I got her a tissue and let the subject end. I did not tell her that her mother's earlier choices were part of why she was still with me. I did not ask what else she remembered about waiting. A 7-year-old should not have to defend a safety plan over macaroni. Later, after she was asleep, Melissa called. Her voice was controlled enough that I knew she had already spoken to Dana. They changed what they want from me. I did not correct the wording. They changed what they're looking at. Same result. I listened while she described the new expectations in the stripped-down language she hated. Safety planning, boundary maintenance, protective parenting, continued separation from Ryan. There would be no immediate return just because the house was physically empty of him. You told Dana what I said. Yes. I knew you would. This was not the betrayal fight from the bag. The anger had burned down into fear. Melissa said, I can do all of that. I hope you do. You still sound like you don't believe me. I believe you want Emma home. That's not the same thing. No. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Ryan sent me something. My body tightened automatically. The interim conditions still barred him from Emma, and from the house. But at that point, direct contact with Melissa had not yet been universally prohibited. I asked if she wanted to show it to me. She forwarded the message. It was different from his first one. There was no argument about the broken window. No claim that Emma had been hysterical. No attempt to replay the midnight facts. Ryan wrote that he would move out permanently. He would arrange for his remaining belongings to be collected through the approved process. He would stay away from Emma. He would stop fighting about access to the house or the things he had left there. In exchange, he wanted Melissa to stop treating every ugly argument from the previous year as proof that their entire relationship had been monstrous. He did not tell her to lie to the police. He did not tell her to hide facts from Dana. He did not tell her to change her account of the night she hit the dresser. That was why the message was effective. It offered her a story she could still live with. Ryan could be gone forever. The crisis night could remain fully described. The bolt, the injury, the abandonment could all stay exactly as they were. And the older months could be treated as private failures inside a relationship that had now ended rather than as a pattern Melissa needed to volunteer every time someone asked what kind of home Emma had been living in. For the first time, I understood what Ryan was doing next. He was no longer asking Melissa to believe nothing bad had happened. He was offering to disappear if she would stop deciding what the past meant. Melissa called me again before I had finished rereading the message. He's saying he'll leave everything alone, she said. I see that. He'll stay away from Emma. That's what he says. And he'll get his things without coming back into the house. Yes. She took a breath. Then she said the part Ryan had been careful not to write. If he's really gone, maybe I don't have to keep dragging every old fight into this unless somebody specifically asks me about it. I looked toward the hallway where Emma was sleeping. The bargain had arrived. The dangerous thing about Ryan's message was not that it asked Melissa to do something outrageous. It asked her to do almost nothing. He would leave. He would take his things. He would stay away from Emma. He would stop arguing about the house. He would stop forcing Melissa to spend energy proving that the relationship had been bad enough to justify ending it. All she had to do, in her own mind, was stop volunteering pieces of the past that no one had specifically requested. The next morning, Melissa called while I was packing Emma's lunch. I could hear cabinet doors opening on her end, and knew she was trying to make herself breakfast, one of the small things she had only recently been able to do without getting dizzy. Emma was upstairs brushing her teeth. I kept my voice low. Melissa did not mention Ryan's message first. She told me she had slept 6 hours. She said the headaches were less sharp. She said she had an appointment later in the week and had written her questions down because she still lost track when she got tired. Then she said, "I've been thinking about what he offered." There was no point pretending I did not know who she meant. I leaned against the counter and looked at Emma's open lunchbox. I figured, he's willing to make it clean. That word bothered me more than I expected. Clean how? You read it. He gets his things. He stays away. He stops trying to come back to the house. He doesn't contact Emma. We stop fighting over every stupid thing from the last year. The cereal container clicked shut upstairs. I waited until I heard Emma moving toward the bathroom. Those stupid things are part of why she is still with me. Melissa exhaled. Some of them are. Not every argument is. I did not answer immediately, because that part was true. Not every bad evening in a relationship belonged in a child welfare case. Not every apology, every slammed cabinet, every exhausted text between two adults proved a safety pattern. The problem was that Melissa had already admitted something much more specific than ordinary conflict. She had taught Emma to stay in her room until Ryan cooled down. She had told her not to make things worse. That was not background noise anymore. Melissa said, "I'm not talking about lying. I know. If somebody asks me whether Emma was ever told to stay in her room, I answer. If somebody asks whether Ryan ever stopped her from coming out, I answer. If they ask about the bolt, obviously I answer. I'm saying I don't have to walk into every conversation and hand them every bad night we ever had." Her voice had changed since we learned what the bag meant. She was not pleading with me to believe she had done nothing wrong. She was building a boundary around how much wrong she thought should count. I understood why. Every new piece of truth had moved Emma farther from home. The bag extended the placement. The words, "she knows," changed the question from whether Ryan was gone to whether Melissa herself could maintain safety. Melissa could see the pattern as clearly as I could, even if we named it differently. Honesty had not yet brought her daughter closer. From where she stood, honesty looked like a door that kept opening onto another hallway. "Do you think leaving the old room rules out will help you get Emma home faster?" I asked. She went quiet. That was the answer. "I think Ryan being gone matters," she said finally. "I think the house being mine again matters. I think I should be judged on what I do now, not on every time I handled something badly before I understood where it was going." There was enough truth in that sentence to make the rest harder. People should be allowed to change. Parents should be allowed to learn. A system that required perfection before reunification would leave children without families. Melissa did not need to become a flawless mother. She needed to become a safe one. But safety could not depend on which version of the past hurt her least. Emma came into the kitchen in socks and her yellow sweatshirt, hair still damp at the ends. I ended the conversation without resolving it. Melissa understood why and did not argue. "Tell her I love her," she said. "I will." Emma slid into a chair and opened her lunchbox to inspect what I had packed. "Why do you always put the apple slices in the little bag?" "So they don't make your crackers soggy." She considered this as if I had revealed advanced engineering. Then she stole one slice before I could zip the bag. I let her. That small, ordinary theft of her own lunch was more important to me than anything Melissa and I had just said, because it reminded me who the adult arguments were supposed to serve. Later that morning, Melissa called Dana and arranged the next practical step. I learned the details from Melissa afterward, not from some private agency file. Because Melissa owned the house and Ryan had no ownership interest, she could change the exterior locks. His remaining belongings would be removed through the approved property exchange process, rather than giving him a reason to walk back through the front door. For Melissa, that plan became proof. She texted me a photo of the locksmith's van in her driveway with one sentence beneath it. "New locks today." I stared at the picture longer than necessary. A week earlier, I would have celebrated it. I still thought it was good. I just no longer thought it was enough. The approved exchange happened 2 days later while Emma was at school. Melissa asked me to come over. Not because she needed protection from Ryan directly, he was not allowed to enter the house during the exchange, but because she did not want to box his things alone. I checked with Dana before agreeing. There was no reason I could not help Melissa pack ordinary property as long as I did not interfere with the case or turn the afternoon into contact between Ryan and me. When I arrived, the front door opened with a new key. That should have felt symbolic. Mostly it felt stiff. The deadbolt caught halfway, and Melissa had to pull the door toward her before it turned. "New lock," she said. "Same old door." For the first time in days, I laughed. The sound surprised both of us. Inside, the house looked less damaged than it had on my last visit. The broken side window had been replaced. The hallway outside Emma's room had been cleaned. The exterior barrel bolt was gone, leaving 2 small screw holes in the trim where it had been mounted. Melissa had not patched them yet. Ryan's presence was harder to remove because it was ordinary. 2 jackets in the hall closet, work boots in the garage, a razor and electric trimmer in the bathroom, a coffee mug from a company golf outing, chargers threaded behind furniture, tools in the basement, half a shelf of paperbacks, the blue blanket he always used on the couch. We did not make a ceremony of any of it. Melissa had been told what could be boxed and how the exchange would happen. We filled cartons, labeled them, and moved them to the garage. Anything uncertain stayed where it was until she could get guidance. No revenge. No throwing clothes onto the lawn. No cutting cords. No satisfying little acts of destruction. That restraint mattered. I watched Melissa fold one of Ryan's sweaters before placing it in a box, and wondered whether she hated herself for still handling it carefully. She caught me looking. "What?" "Nothing. You're doing that thing." "What thing?" "The face where you decide not to say what you're thinking, because you think saying it would make you a bad person." I put a stack of books into the box between us. "I was thinking it's strange to pack someone out of your life and still fold his sweater." Melissa looked down at the gray fabric in her hands. Then she set it in the box. I don't know how to hate 15 months all at once. It was the most honest thing she had said to me all week. I sat back on my heels. "You don't have to." Her eyes lifted. "I need you to keep Emma safe," I said. "That is not the same thing as needing you to hate every day you spent with him." Some of the tension left her shoulders. That afternoon showed me why Ryan's bargain worked so well. There had been normal life inside the relationship. There had been grocery lists and TV shows and fixed railings. There had been nights when Emma laughed at his animal-shaped pancakes. There had been enough tenderness to make Melissa ashamed of treating the whole 15 months as if every minute had been a warning she deliberately ignored. Ryan did not need her to believe he was innocent. He only needed her to believe the good days earned the bad ones a smaller name. By 3 o'clock, the boxes were lined along one side of the garage. The approved pickup happened without Ryan entering the residence. I stayed inside with Melissa while the exchange was completed. I never saw him. I did not need to. When it was over, the garage held only Melissa's car, a bicycle, 2 plastic storage bins, and a rectangle of dust where Ryan's tool chest had been. Melissa closed the garage door. Then she stood with her back against it. "He's out." This time the sentence was physically true. No clothes in the closet. No key that fit the new locks. No ordinary right to walk into the kitchen and behave as if the household still belonged to him. The stay-away conditions remained in place. The property dispute he might have used to keep 1 foot inside the house was over. I let the progress be real. "Yes," I said, "he is." Melissa walked through the rooms afterward, as if taking inventory of her own life. She opened the hall closet, where her coats now hung with empty space between them. She stood in the bathroom doorway and stared at the cleared half of the counter. In the kitchen, she removed the mug from the company golf outing and put it in the last box before remembering the box had already gone. She held the mug for a moment, then she put it in the trash. I did not comment. The house was objectively safer than it had been on the night Emma called me. That mattered too. The problem was that Melissa treated every physical improvement as an argument for ending the questions about her judgment. She turned the new front door key over in her hand and listed the things she could now prove. Ryan's belongings were gone, he could not enter the house, and the exterior bolt was off Emma's door. I agreed with every point. When she asked why it still felt as if none of it counted, I told her it did. It simply did not answer the question the case was now asking about her judgment. She looked down the hallway at the 2 screw holes in Emma's doorframe and said quietly, "Not enough." I had no reason to pretend otherwise. Melissa sat at the kitchen table. The movement was careful. The headache still punished her if she moved too fast. I poured water into 2 glasses and sat across from her. "I can prove he is gone," she said. "I can prove the locks are different. I can prove I'm not talking to him. I can do counseling. I can do whatever parenting class they want. But I cannot go back and redo last year. No one can. Then at some point they have to stop asking me to." The afternoon had not prepared me for where she went next. Melissa opened the Notes app on her phone. She had begun listing the things she expected people to ask during upcoming case conversations. The crisis night, the bag, the earlier room rules, Ryan's contact after the incident, the steps she had taken to separate from him. Seeing the list told me how seriously she was taking the process. Then she told me how she planned to answer. The crisis night, completely. The bag, completely. If asked whether Emma had ever been expected to stay in her room during arguments, Melissa would say yes. If asked whether Ryan had ever controlled when she came out, Melissa would answer truthfully. But she would not volunteer additional older examples. She would not bring up every time she told Emma to wait unless the question required it. She would not offer the phrase pattern herself. "I am not lying," she said. "I didn't say you were. You're thinking it. No. I'm thinking you're deciding in advance which truths deserve to be visible." Her jaw tightened. "I am deciding not to turn every bad decision I ever made into evidence that I should lose my daughter. That is not what I said. It is what happens every time I tell them something." There was no useful answer to that because, from Melissa's perspective, the sequence supported her. More truth had meant more scrutiny. More scrutiny had meant more time without Emma. I understood the temptation so clearly that I could almost feel it working on me. Ryan was gone. The house was changed. The bolt was removed. Melissa was doing what everyone had asked. Why drag old incidents into a future that could be different? Then I remembered the reason I knew those incidents existed at all. Melissa had accidentally said, "She knows." Not Ryan, not Emma. Melissa. The older rules mattered because they explained how a 7-year-old learned that adult anger controlled access to food, comfort, and her own mother. They were not embarrassing relationship details. They were safety information. I looked at Melissa's phone. "If you choose that version, I am not helping you prepare it." Her face went still. "I didn't ask you to. You asked me to sit here while you told me what you planned to say. I wanted my sister to listen. I am listening." "No, you're evaluating." The word was accurate enough to hurt. I pushed my chair back slightly. "Then let me be clear. I am not your caseworker. I am not your lawyer. I am not deciding what questions you have to answer. But if someone asks me what I know, I am not going to pretend I only know the crisis night." Melissa looked away. "I knew you would say that." I almost asked why she had called me over if she already knew. Instead, I saw what she wanted. Not a lie. Permission. If I told her the house was safe enough now, if I told her old incidents were old, if I told her she had done enough, she could hear the same judgment in her own voice and trust it. I could not give her that. Melissa closed the Notes app. "I'm going to answer what they ask," she said. Truthfully. I'm not volunteering things nobody asks me about. The decision settled between us. No door slammed and neither of us raised our voice, but something had settled between us. Melissa was no longer only afraid of what the full past might cost her. She had decided how much of that past she intended to expose. I left her house before Emma's school day ended. On the drive back, I realized Ryan's bargain had already succeeded in one way. Even if Melissa never spoke to him again, it had given her a framework that felt protective. He disappears. She describes the worst night. The older pattern becomes private history. Emma comes home. It was a clean path. Clean paths can be dangerous when they require leaving dirt under the floor. At pickup, Emma climbed into my car carrying a paper sun she had made in class. She talked for most of the drive about how one of the yellow strips had fallen off because the glue stick was basically empty forever. I listened. I asked whether she wanted tape. I did not tell her that her mother had spent the afternoon removing a man from the house. I did not tell her the locks had changed again. Those facts belonged to adults until they changed something Emma needed to know. That evening, after homework and dinner, I found an email notification from Dana, asking to schedule a separate conversation with me. Not a group call, not another check-in about school pickup, my own account. I called her after Emma went upstairs. Dana said the case had reached the point where she needed my complete first-hand safety-relevant account kept separate from Melissa's. She reminded me to stay with what I had personally witnessed and what Melissa had directly told me. No guesses. No diagnoses. No conclusions about what Ryan or Melissa had secretly intended. That boundary should have made the task easier. It did the opposite, because I knew exactly what belonged inside it. The midnight call, the hallway bolt, the duffel packed only for Emma. Melissa's admission that she had nearly sent her daughter away to preserve the relationship, and the sentence that changed everything after the bag. She knows she's supposed to stay there until he cools down. Dana asked if the next morning worked. I looked toward the stairs, where Emma had left her reading book on the third step. Yes, I said. When we hung up, I stayed at the kitchen table with my phone in front of me. Melissa had just decided she would not volunteer the older pattern unless someone directly asked her. The next morning, someone was going to ask me for everything I knew. The next morning, I woke before Emma and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad I never wrote on. I had brought it downstairs because the old version of me liked lists. Lists made complicated things look honest. They gave every problem a box, a line, a sequence. Call the school. Pack lunch. Confirm pickup. Reschedule a meeting. Buy toothpaste. I had survived the previous 2 weeks by turning disruption into tasks I could finish. But there was no useful list for what Dana had asked of me. Give me your complete account. I poured coffee and let it go cold. My laptop stayed shut. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator cycling on and the faint rush of water through the pipes when the sprinkler system outside started somewhere along the row of townhomes. Emma's backpack leaned against the chair across from me. Her purple lunchbox sat open to dry beside the sink. For the first time since the midnight call, nobody needed me to move quickly. That made the choice harder. If I had been standing outside a locked house again, I would have known exactly what to do. If Emma had been crying on the phone, there would have been no question about loyalty, consequences, or whether telling the truth might hurt someone I loved. There would have been only the door and the child behind it. This time the danger was not immediate. Melissa was home. Ryan no longer had ordinary access to the house. His belongings were gone. The locks had been changed. Emma was sleeping safely under my roof. If I kept my mouth shut, nobody would collapse on the floor that morning. The cost would come later, quietly enough for me to pretend I had not caused it. That was the temptation. I picked up the pen and wrote one sentence at the top of the page. Only what I know. Then I drew a line under it. I was not going to diagnose Melissa. I was not going to tell Dana my sister was unfit. I was not going to claim every cautious thing Emma did came from Ryan, or turn a 7-year-old's habits into evidence. I was not going to ask for custody, campaign against reunification, or build a case out of guesses. I would say what I had personally seen. I would say what Melissa had directly told me. And I would stop before the truth became my opinion. That distinction mattered, because anger can make certainty feel cleaner than it is. I was angry at Ryan. I was angry at Melissa. I was angry at myself for missing what had been happening while I accepted ordinary explanations for canceled dinners and careful phone calls. If I let that anger decide the shape of my account, I would become exactly what Melissa already feared I was becoming, the sister who took over because she believed she knew better. But refusing to exaggerate did not require me to hide what was real. When Emma came downstairs, she was carrying one sock and looking for the other. I found it under the couch, made oatmeal, braided her hair badly enough that she redid the front herself, and drove her to school without mentioning the meeting. She told me her class was making paper suns for a bulletin board. She wanted yellow construction paper, because orange looked like a pumpkin. She complained that I had cut her apple slices too thick. I listened to all of it with a gratitude that felt almost painful. At the curb, she unbuckled, then looked back at me. "Mom calls tonight?" "Yes. 7 o'clock. Okay." She climbed out. I watched her disappear through the school doors and did not ask her one more question about Ryan, the room, the bag, or the night she called me. That was another line I had decided not to cross. If adults needed facts, they could get them without turning Emma into the person responsible for supplying enough truth to justify her own safety. Dana met me at a Franklin County office later that morning. There was nothing dramatic about the room: beige walls, a small table, 2 chairs on one side and one on the other, a box of tissues that looked as if it had been placed there because people regularly reached the point where words stopped working. Dana had a file open in front of her. She explained that she wanted the safety-relevant information I had firsthand. She did not ask me to make legal conclusions. She did not ask whether Melissa deserved to lose Emma. She asked me to start with what I had personally witnessed and then separate that from what Melissa had told me later. The structure helped. I began at 12:07 a.m. I described Emma's call. I repeated the 3 statements exactly as I remembered them. That she was hungry, that Ryan had locked her in, that her mother would not wake up. I explained that I called 911 before driving, that nobody answered when I reached the house, and that I broke the side window because Emma remained trapped with an unresponsive adult. I described the hallway bolt. I described Melissa on the floor. I described what I did not know. I did not see the confrontation. I did not see Ryan shove Melissa. I did not watch him slide the bolt. Those details came later from Melissa and were consistent with the physical scene, but I had not witnessed them myself. Dana let me finish before asking about the duffel bag. That was where the account stopped being only about Ryan. I told her what I had believed when I saw it beside the door. I had assumed Melissa packed it because she was finally leaving with Emma. I told Dana I had repeated that assumption at the hospital. Then I told her what changed. The bag contained Emma's clothes, school items, medication equipment, comfort objects, and insurance information. Nothing belonged to Melissa. When I confronted my sister, Melissa admitted she had packed the bag because Ryan wanted Emma to stay with me temporarily while the adults worked on their relationship. I heard my own voice flatten as I said it. Dana asked, "Did Melissa tell you why she changed her mind?" Yes. I explained Emma's question exactly as Melissa had repeated it to me. "Am I going to Auntie's because he doesn't want me here?" I did not add an interpretation Emma herself had never given. Melissa had told me that was when she finally heard what the plan meant. She decided Emma was not leaving alone. She decided both of them would leave. Dana wrote for a moment. Then she asked about the earlier room rules. I had known that question was coming. It still felt like stepping off something solid. Melissa told me Emma knew she was supposed to stay in her room until Ryan cooled down. Dana looked up. Her exact wording? As close as I can give it, yes. She said, she knows she's supposed to stay there until he cools down. I told her Melissa had described a progression rather than one isolated prior event. Adult arguments became Emma being sent to her room. Ryan began deciding when she could come out. Melissa sometimes told Emma to wait longer. Not to make things worse, to give him time to calm down. I was careful about the bolt. Melissa had never told me the exact exterior bolt was used every time, and I said so. I was careful about food. I had seen Emma ask permission for snacks and act cautious around food, but I had no proof those behaviors came from a specific punishment, so I did not present them that way. I was careful about duration. I did not claim earlier separations lasted hours. I was careful about intent. I did not tell Dana Melissa wanted her child harmed. Everything Melissa had told me suggested the opposite. She believed she was reducing conflict. Dana asked whether Melissa understood, when she told me these things, that the earlier rules were unsafe. I think she was beginning to, I said, but I can't tell you what was in her head. I can tell you she kept comparing the earlier incidents to the worst night, and using the differences to explain why they weren't as bad. Dana nodded once. That was the closest I came to interpretation. The rest was fact. The meeting took less time than I expected. There was no moment when Dana pushed a file across the table and declared that everything had changed. No one congratulated me for honesty. No one said I had saved Emma a second time. I was grateful for that. Before I left, Dana told me the account would become part of the agency's safety assessment. Because the information showed a longer pattern of accommodation, the current kinship placement would remain in place while Melissa demonstrated protective behavior over time. The next steps toward broader, less structured contact would depend on what Melissa actually did maintaining separation, recognizing the earlier rules as unsafe, following the case plan, showing she could make protective decisions without Emma forcing the issue. Dana was careful with her language. She did not say Melissa had lost her daughter forever. She did not say reunification was off the table. She said it was not moving forward simply because Ryan was physically gone. That was enough. Something real had changed because I had spoken. I left the office and sat in my car without starting it. My phone was face down in the cup holder. I knew Melissa would hear about the decision. Maybe not every word I had used, but enough to understand that the older pattern was no longer private between sisters. For years, whenever Melissa made a mistake that upset the family, I had helped reduce the impact. I explained her lateness, covered forgotten obligations, loaned money she repaid later, smoothed arguments after funerals and birthdays, and small ordinary disasters. None of those things had seemed dangerous. They were the currency of sisterhood, as I understood it. I made the rough edges softer because she was mine. That morning, for the first time, I had deliberately refused to soften the edge. I had not stopped loving my sister. I had stopped protecting her from the fact that her choices mattered. The distinction felt clean in theory and brutal in practice. Melissa called before I reached the school pickup line. I let the first call ring out because I was driving. When I parked, I called her back. She answered immediately. They're keeping everything the same. Her voice was quiet enough that I knew shouting would have been easier. I said, for now. You told them all of it? Yes. The room stuff? Yes. The bag? Yes. I waited for her to accuse me of lying. She did not. Instead, she said, you helped them keep her from me. The sentence hurt, because from where Melissa stood, it was true, in the most painful possible way. My account had contributed to a decision that kept Emma in my home instead of hers. Pretending otherwise would have been another kind of dishonesty. I told them what I knew. You could have told them Ryan is gone. They already know. You could have told them the house is safe now. I told them the locks were changed and his things were out. But you also gave them every reason to think I'm the problem. I closed my eyes. There were a dozen answers I could have used to defend myself. I could have reminded her. She packed Emma's bag. I could have repeated the sentence about waiting until Ryan cooled down. I could have told her I was not the one who created those facts. None of those answers would change the state we were in. So I said the only thing that mattered. I could not tell them Emma was safe with you when I no longer knew that was true. Melissa inhaled sharply. You always wanted to be the responsible one. I almost said no. Then I remembered too many years of enjoying exactly that role. The older sister with the stable job. The one who remembered appointments. The one who had cash in an emergency. The one everyone called because I would fix things without making them feel foolish. Maybe there had been pride in it. Maybe Melissa had felt judged by me long before I understood she felt anything at all. But that was not the reason Emma was sleeping in my spare room. This is not about which one of us is better, I said. Easy for you to say. You're the one who gets to pick her up from school. You're the one who hears what she wants for breakfast. You're the one everybody calls safe. Her voice finally broke. I gripped the steering wheel even though the car was parked. I don't want your place, Mel. You have it. No. I have a temporary responsibility because Emma needs somewhere safe. That is not the same as being her mother. It probably feels pretty close from where she's sitting. That one landed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Melissa said, I told you I made mistakes. I told you everything because you were my sister. There it was. The wound under the accusation. Not that I had invented something. That I had taken something she believed belonged inside the family and moved it outside. I know. You don't get to say that like it makes it better. I'm not trying to make it better. Then what are you trying to do? I looked toward the school entrance where parents were beginning to line up along the sidewalk. Make sure Emma is never asked to carry the cost of our loyalty again. Melissa made a sound that might have been a laugh if there had been anything funny left between us. Fine. The word went cold. From now on, we talk about Emma. School, visits, medical stuff. Anything Dana says I need to know. That's it. Melissa, no. You made your choice. I get to make mine. She ended the call. I sat there until the school doors opened. Emma came out carrying a sheet of paper shaped like a sun. The rays were uneven yellow strips, and her name was written across the center in purple marker. She saw my face and slowed down. What happened? Nothing you need to fix. She studied me for a second. That answer mattered more than I expected. For 2 weeks, adults had been making Emma feel that every change in the house somehow connected back to something she had said, done, or failed to do. I would not hand her another problem, simply because I was hurting. I held up her paper instead. Yellow, good choice. Orange looked like a pumpkin, she said, as if this had already been established beyond reasonable disagreement. We went home. Melissa kept her word about our contact. Her messages became narrower than before. Pick up at 3:15? Did Emma finish the reading log? Dana confirmed Saturday visit at 10. Please send the blue sweater. No extra conversation. No complaints about headaches. No mention of the house. No question about my work. I answered every message with the same precision. I did not punish her by becoming cold with Emma's schedule. I did not use access to the child to force my sister to talk to me. If Melissa wanted the old relationship gone, I had to accept that as one of the consequences of the choice I had made. That was the part no one warns you about when they tell you to do the right thing. Sometimes the right thing does not feel righteous. Sometimes it just leaves a quieter room. 2 days later, Dana told me the next contact review would focus on Melissa's demonstrated behavior rather than promises. The current arrangement stayed. No new restriction was imposed because of my feelings, and no one treated my opinion like a court order. But the path forward was now tied to evidence that Melissa could hold a boundary without needing a crisis to do it. That was exactly what I had said I needed to believe. It still hurt to hear it made official. Saturday's visit took place in the structured setting already approved. I brought Emma, handed over the blue sweater, and stepped back. Melissa hugged her daughter for a long time. Emma immediately began talking about the paper sun, then about a spelling quiz, then about a classmate who had traded chocolate milk for pretzels. Melissa listened to every word. She did not look at me once. I did not need her to. When the visit ended, Emma came back to me carrying a small drawing she had made with Melissa. 2 stick figures stood beside a square house. A third figure stood off to the side, under a yellow sun. I did not ask who was who. Emma folded it and put it in her backpack. The following evening, Melissa called instead of texting. I almost did not answer because we had no scheduled reason to talk. Then I saw her name and thought of emergencies. Old habits that do not disappear just because a relationship changes. "Is Emma okay?" she asked first. "She's upstairs reading." Melissa was breathing fast. "What happened?" I asked. "They asked me about messages." I said nothing. Ryan's lawyer gave them screenshots from his phone. The room seemed to narrow around me. Screenshots of what? My messages to him. Things I wrote. Things they say show I was part of the decisions in that house. For the first time since I had given my account, Melissa did not sound angry at me. She sounded afraid of her own words. Melissa did not tell me everything on that first call. She gave me the shape of it. Ryan's lawyer had turned over screenshots from his phone. Investigators had asked her about things she herself had written, and for the first time the past was being presented back to her, without the explanations she had used to survive it. The details came over the next 2 days, piece by piece, because that was how Melissa could stand to look at them. The first screenshot was the one I had already seen in passing at the hospital. Months earlier, after a bad evening, Melissa had written to Ryan that Emma had been making everything harder lately. At the time, I had dismissed it as a tired parent, complaining privately. Now, Ryan's side placed the sentence beside everything that came after. The argument was not that he had behaved well. It was that Melissa had agreed there was a problem in the house, and that the problem was Emma. Other exchanges from the same phone history added context, but none carried the weight of the old line about Emma making everything harder. Ryan did not need a pile of new revelations. He only needed the material Melissa had already created: the text, the bag, the room rules, and her own early minimization to argue that she had participated. None of it was fake, which was exactly why the move landed. If the screenshots had been altered, Melissa could have fought the lie. If he had invented a story, she could have pointed to the invention. Instead, he chose the parts that were true and arranged them around one claim: Melissa had participated. She had helped make rules she was now describing as dangerous. She had minimized the same conduct before the midnight crisis, forced everything into daylight. Ryan had stopped trying to protect her. His offer had failed, so he no longer needed her version of the past to stay gentle. He needed her to go down with him. Melissa told me that during one interview, an investigator asked whether she had ever believed keeping Emma in her room was a reasonable way to de-escalate arguments. She said yes. Then she tried to explain what she meant by reasonable at the time. The question that followed was worse. If she had believed it was reasonable, when exactly had it become wrong? Melissa told me she had no clean answer. There was the night of the head injury, of course. There was the exterior bolt. There was Ryan leaving. But those were endpoints, not beginnings. The question forced her backward to every earlier moment she had treated as smaller because nothing catastrophic happened afterward. She called me from her kitchen after that interview. Her voice sounded worn down rather than angry. "They're making it look like I agreed with him." I stood at my sink rinsing Emma's purple lunchbox. "Did you?" The old version of our relationship would never have allowed that question so quickly. Melissa went silent. Then she said, "Sometimes." I shut off the water. She told me she had agreed with some of the rules because she believed the alternative was worse. She believed sending Emma to her room was better than letting her hear adults fight. She believed asking Emma to wait was better than allowing Ryan to confront her for interrupting. She believed taking responsibility for handling Emma was a way to keep Ryan from being harsher. Each decision had a protective explanation. Ryan's screenshots stripped the explanations away and left the decisions. I could hear how badly Melissa wanted me to tell her that context erased them. I did not. I also did not tell her Ryan's argument made her equally responsible for what happened that night. It did not. He had restrained them. He had left after seeing her injured. He had secured the door from the outside. Those acts did not become less real because Melissa had failed earlier. But Melissa's failures did not disappear because Ryan's were worse. For the first time, neither of us tried to make those truths compete. The child welfare consequences became clearer that same week. Dana did not deliver them like a punishment. She explained that the agency had to look at Melissa's own failure to protect, not only Ryan's actions. The earlier pattern, the bag and Melissa's admissions, meant the case could involve a formal neglect-related finding or longer protective conditions. Contact could expand only if Melissa demonstrated something more than separation from Ryan. She had to show that she understood what she had normalized. The consequence was not abstract. Before the screenshots were raised, Melissa had been working toward a longer visit that would have given her several unsupervised daytime hours with Emma if the next review went well. That step was postponed. The structured visit stayed in place while the agency looked more closely at Melissa's judgment and the history she had first described as minor. Nobody told her she had permanently lost the chance. They told her it would not expand yet. Melissa took that harder than any warning about a possible finding. She had counted those hours before anyone had approved them. She had pictured making Emma lunch in her own kitchen, helping with homework at the dining table, walking through the house without a caseworker's schedule sitting between them. When the step was deferred, she called me and said, "I was almost there." I knew better than to tell her not to think of it as losing something. It was a loss. Not permanent, not final, but real. "You were almost at the next step," I said, "and now I'm not." "No." She cried quietly for a minute, then asked whether Emma knew. I told her no. Emma knew only the visit schedule she had been given. There was no reason to make a 7-year-old mourn time she had never been promised. Melissa agreed. That agreement mattered. Earlier in the case, she had nearly promised Emma that Ryan's absence would mean home. Now, while hurting, she chose not to turn a future possibility into another burden for her daughter. What frightened Melissa most was the possibility Dana had named. A formal neglect, related finding, or longer protective conditions could remain relevant even if Ryan never returned. When she called afterward, she said Emma might stay with me longer because she had admitted things. I told her the delay came from what had happened, not from the act of admitting it. For once, she did not argue the distinction. The risk was no longer Ryan returning to the house. It was no longer even whether Melissa could convince everyone that the worst night was exceptional. Her own choices had become part of the official question. She was facing the possibility that telling more truth might make her path to Emma longer, while telling less could protect the picture she wanted people to have of her. That was the leverage Ryan had always counted on. Not love, shame. For several days, Melissa's first instinct was still to fight the interpretation. She told me her attorney had asked whether she believed my account made the earlier room rules sound more intentional than they were. Melissa wanted to say yes. She wanted to argue that I had seen everything through the midnight crisis and then looked backward with the worst possible meaning attached. I could understand why. I had done exactly that in some moments. Once you know where a pattern ends, every earlier step can look inevitable. Real life is not that clean. But Melissa's attorney apparently did something useful. Instead of asking whether I had judged her fairly, he walked her through the facts that existed without me. The bag did not require my interpretation. Melissa had admitted packing it. The messages did not require my interpretation. She had written them to Ryan. The hallway bolt did not require my interpretation. Police photographed it. Her statement that Emma knew to stay in the room until Ryan cooled down did not require my interpretation. Melissa had said it herself, first to me, and then again in the formal process. Her first minimization of the night did not require my interpretation. She had described Ryan as panicked, overwhelmed, someone who believed she would recover. My opinion could disappear from the file tomorrow, and those facts would remain. Melissa told me this while we sat in my car outside Emma's school one afternoon. It was the first time in days she had chosen to see me face to face for a reason that was not a scheduled handoff. She had asked if we could talk for 10 minutes before pickup. I said yes. She stared through the windshield while parents moved along the sidewalk. I kept thinking if I could show them you were angry at me, then maybe some of what you said would matter less. I did not respond. That sounds awful. It sounds scared. She turned toward me. Don't make it nicer. I held her eyes. All right. She looked away again. I wanted you to be the problem, because I know how to fight with you. I know how to be mad at you. I know how to say you've always thought you were the responsible one. The words were familiar, but this time, she was not throwing them at me. She was examining why she had needed them. She said her attorney had asked a simple question. If Laura had never spoken, what would still exist? Melissa answered it herself. The bag, my messages, the bolt, what I told Dana, what I told you, what I told Ryan for months. The next time she spoke with her attorney, Melissa told him not to build any response around claiming I had fabricated the admissions. She still disagreed with some of my conclusions, and she was entitled to. But she would not say I invented the bag conversation or the she knows sentence, because I had not. That decision did not repair our relationship. It did something more useful. It removed me as her escape route. If Melissa could no longer make the case about whether her older sister was too judgmental, she had to decide what she herself believed about the household she had helped maintain. Her attention moved away from proving I was unfair and toward identifying what she had omitted. Her mouth tightened. Me. I understood what she meant. Not that she was the whole problem, that she could no longer remove herself from the story. The school doors opened before either of us could say more. Emma came out carrying a worksheet and stopped when she saw both cars. Her face brightened at Melissa, then shifted into uncertainty when she realized this was not a scheduled visit. Melissa did not use the moment to ask for extra time. She did not tell Emma she might be coming home soon. She only hugged her, told her she loved her, and said she had come by to talk to me. That restraint was small, but I noticed it. So did Emma. Are you fighting? She asked. No, Melissa said. Emma looked at me for confirmation. We're not fighting. That was true. We were doing something harder. A few days later, during a structured visit, the consequence became visible in a place none of the adults could hide from. I was not inside the room for the whole visit. That was deliberate. Melissa needed time with her daughter that was not supervised by my emotional presence. But I was nearby for the handoff and the final portion, and later Melissa told me the part I had not heard directly. Emma had been drawing at a small table while Melissa sat beside her. Nothing serious was being discussed. Emma was coloring a dog blue because, according to her, real colors were boring. Then she asked, Mom, are you still in trouble? Melissa told me the question caught her so completely she almost pretended not to understand. Instead, she asked what Emma meant. Emma kept coloring. With the people. Melissa said she told her the grown-ups were still working on things, and that Emma did not need to worry about them. Then Emma asked the question that changed what Melissa wanted from the case. Is it because I called Aunt Laura? When Melissa repeated that sentence to me later, she could barely get through it. Emma was not giving new evidence. She was doing something much more important. She was assigning blame. To herself. Melissa told her no immediately. She said the trouble belonged to choices adults had made. Emma had done the right thing when she called for help. Emma's next question was small enough to destroy every defense Melissa still had. Then why did everything get worse after? There was no 7-year-old version of legal causation that could answer that cleanly. Melissa did not try. She told Emma sometimes the truth makes grown-ups fix things they should have fixed earlier. She kept it short. She did not explain neglect findings or interviews or evidence. She did not make Emma comfort her. Then Emma asked if Mom was sad, because she told. Melissa said yes. She was sad about many things, but not because Emma called. Melissa left it there. When the visit ended, she walked Emma back to me, holding her hand in both of hers, as though she was afraid to let any part of the child carry what belonged to adults. Emma climbed into my car and asked whether we could get frozen yogurt on the way home. I said yes. Melissa stood on the curb watching us leave. That evening she called. For the first time since the case began, she did not ask when Emma might come home. She said, "I made her think telling the truth hurts me." I was sitting on the edge of my bed folding towels. She's 7. She's trying to make sense of cause and effect. No, Laura. She's doing what I taught her to do. I stopped folding. Melissa continued before I could answer. She thinks if she had waited longer, maybe none of this would be happening. She thinks keeping adults calm keeps the family together. The sentence sounded familiar because it was the same logic Melissa had lived by. Now she could hear it in her daughter. She cannot grow up believing that, Melissa said. No. There was a long silence. Then she said, "I need to see what I left out. Not what Ryan had. Not what I had told. What she had left out." That was the first real change. The following morning, Melissa met with her attorney and Dana separately as part of the ongoing process. I was not there. I did not need to be. What I know about that day came from Melissa afterward, and for once she did not tell me the story to ask whether she had been treated unfairly. She told me she asked to review her earlier account and compare it with what she had since admitted. She saw the gaps immediately. The crisis night was detailed. The months before it were fog. She had described arguments without describing the rules that followed them. She had described sending Emma to her room without saying Ryan increasingly controlled when she came out. She had described the bag as a plan she abandoned without initially admitting how far she had gone in preparing Emma to leave alone. She had admitted telling Emma to wait, but not how often she had used that language to manage Ryan's moods. None of those gaps were accidental, in the simple sense. Melissa had chosen a version that made the night look like the moment everything went wrong. Now she understood it was the moment everything became impossible to keep calling normal. Ryan's betrayal had done what his bargain could not. It forced Melissa to see that if she kept protecting herself, he would continue owning the meaning of every true thing she had done. He could point to the messages and say she agreed. He could point to the bag and say she chose him. He could point to the room rules and say they were shared. As long as Melissa's goal was to avoid those facts, Ryan controlled her with them. The only way out was not to prove they were false. It was to stop hiding from the part that was true. Melissa told me she sat across from her attorney with her hands shaking and said she needed to correct her account before anyone else used the omissions to speak for her. He warned her that adding detail could hurt her child welfare position. It could make the failure to protect issue clearer, not smaller. It would not guarantee Emma came home faster. It might do the opposite. Melissa said she understood. Then she asked for Dana to be included in the correction process. That afternoon, before the formal follow-up began, she called me from the parking lot. "I'm not asking you to say anything different," she said. I closed my eyes. A month earlier, those words would have been impossible between us. "I know. I'm not asking you to help me get out of this." "I know," she inhaled. "When I go in there, they're going to hear things that make me look worse." I did not tell her she was brave. That would have turned accountability into a compliment before she had actually done it. So I asked, "Are they true?" "Yes." "Then tell them." She was quiet for several seconds. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. "There's something I left out, and it's not going to help me." Melissa corrected her account the next morning. "I was not in the room when she did it, and I was grateful for that." By then, too much of our family had already been filtered through what I saw, what I remembered, what I reported, and what other people asked me to explain. If Melissa was finally going to tell the parts that made her look worst, they needed to come from her without me sitting 3 feet away like a witness she was trying to satisfy. What I knew came afterward. First from Dana in the narrow language appropriate to Emma's placement, then from Melissa herself. Her correction did not depend on anything new. It changed the story by removing the spaces she had left around her own choices. She admitted the duffel bag had been packed for Emma alone, not as an emergency evacuation bag, not because she had already decided to leave Ryan. She had packed her 7-year-old daughter's clothes, toothbrush, school things, and comfort items because she had agreed, at least temporarily, with the idea that Emma could stay with me while Melissa and Ryan tried to repair their relationship. She admitted she had known the room rule was not invented on the night I broke the window. The exterior bolt and the hours-long confinement were an escalation, but sending Emma away during arguments had already become part of the household's way of managing Ryan. Melissa had sometimes told Emma to stay put, wait quietly, and give him time to cool down. She had used words that made obedience sound like peacekeeping. She admitted she had minimized the pattern even to herself. A bad night became stress. A frightening rule became space. Emma being careful became maturity. Ryan apologizing became evidence that the last incident was over instead of evidence that there had been an incident to apologize for. And she admitted that she had not changed course because she suddenly understood all of it at once. She changed course because Emma looked at the packed bag and asked whether she was being sent away, because Ryan did not want her there. That question had forced Melissa to hear the arrangement without adult language around it. No temporary reset, no relationship breathing room, no chance to work on things. A child being removed so 2 adults could preserve a relationship that had already taught her to disappear when one of them was angry. When Melissa called me late that afternoon, her voice sounded exhausted rather than relieved. "I told them," she said. "I was standing at my kitchen counter cutting strawberries for Emma. The knife stopped in my hand." "All of it?" "The parts I kept making smaller." She did not ask whether I was proud of her. She did not tell me the correction should make everything okay. Instead, she walked me through what she had admitted in the same plain order she had used with the professionals. The bag, the room, the waiting, the times she had told Emma not to make things worse. Her own habit of judging every earlier incident against the final night, and concluding that anything less severe did not count in the same way. I listened without rescuing her from the language. At one point she said, "I kept saying I never thought he would do what he did that night." "That can still be true," I said. "I know, but I was using it to avoid saying I knew enough before that night." That was different from every conversation we had had since the hospital. Before, Melissa had admitted facts and then immediately explained why they should not mean as much as they appeared to mean. This time she did not attach a defense to every sentence. She sounded like someone inventorying damage after the house was already on fire. The next difficult part came from Ryan's side. His lawyer's argument had not disappeared simply because Melissa became more honest. If anything, her correction gave the defense something cleaner to say. She had participated in the earlier rules. She had sent the texts. She had packed the bag. She had sometimes been the parent telling Emma to wait in her room. The more Melissa admitted, the easier it became to argue that the household system had not belonged to Ryan alone. Melissa's attorney explained that to her, before she finalized the correction. Dana later confirmed only the child safety consequence, not the criminal strategy, but Melissa told me the rest herself. She said she had been warned that the defense would use every admission to argue shared responsibility and damaged credibility. For several minutes on the phone, she was quiet. Then she said, They asked why anyone should believe me now if I'm admitting I helped enforce some of it. What did you say? I said they shouldn't pretend I didn't. I set the knife down. Melissa breathed once, unevenly, then repeated the sentence she had given them. I failed her. That does not make what he did disappear. There was no triumph in her voice. That was why the sentence mattered. Ryan's leverage had depended on Melissa believing that admitting her failures would somehow erase his. Once she stopped fighting that premise, the trap weakened. She could acknowledge that she had packed the bag, enforced some of the room rules, and minimized what was happening, without taking responsibility for the choices Ryan made during the crisis. I failed her. That does not make what he did disappear. Was not a clever defense. It was simply the first position she had taken that did not require one adult's wrongdoing to cancel out the others. Ryan could still use her old words to embarrass her and make the child welfare process harder. What he could no longer do was frighten her into silence by threatening to reveal facts she had already owned. That shift did not bring Emma home. 2 days later, we had a case plan meeting focused on the placement. I attended because I was the kinship caregiver. Melissa attended because she was Emma's mother. Dana kept the meeting centered on safety and access rather than the criminal case. Nothing in that meeting treated honesty like a reward. Melissa's correction actually made one part of the immediate future harder. By acknowledging that the problem existed before the crisis night, and that she had sometimes participated in the accommodation, she removed the easiest argument for quick reunification. The issue could no longer be described as a dangerous boyfriend who had been removed from an otherwise protective home. The house was Ryan-free. The locks were changed. The stay-away conditions were real. But Melissa's own judgment had become part of the case. Dana explained that Emma would remain with me for now. Contact could expand only through demonstrated progress. Melissa had to keep the boundary with Ryan, participate in counseling and protective, parenting work, follow the safety plan, and show over time that she could recognize danger without waiting for Emma to force the issue. The details were practical, not punitive, but their meaning was unmistakable. Emma was not going home because Melissa had finally told the truth. Melissa sat across the table from me with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of water. For a moment I expected the old reflex. I expected her to say the correction proved she deserved trust. I expected her to ask why honesty was being used against her. I expected her to look at me and silently demand that I explain she had changed. She did none of those things. She asked Dana what she needed to complete first. The question was so ordinary that it took me a second to understand what had changed. Dana answered in the same measured way she answered everything else. The current supervised structure would continue. Progress would be reviewed. Melissa's participation and consistency mattered. No one could promise a date for return. Melissa nodded. She looked sick with grief. But when Dana asked whether she understood why the current arrangement was staying in place, she answered without going back to Ryan. She said the problem was no longer only whether he could enter the house. It was that she had spent months teaching Emma and herself to organize ordinary life around an adult man's moods. If she wanted anyone to trust her judgment again, she had to show that Emma would never again be expected to keep the peace for grown-ups. Dana asked what that meant in practice. Melissa did not have a polished answer ready. She thought for a moment and said, Emma needed to be able to ask for food without wondering whether it was a bad time. She needed to be able to leave her room, ask for her mother, say she wanted to go somewhere else, and call a trusted adult if she was scared. Melissa's voice caught when she said the last part. I knew she was thinking about the phone call that had started all of this. Dana did not treat the answer like a test Melissa had passed. She explained that the case would move on demonstrated behavior, not the right words in one meeting. The supervised structure would remain for now. Counseling, protective, parenting work, and consistent boundaries would matter over time. Melissa asked the question I had been waiting for: whether correcting her account had made her situation worse. Dana answered carefully. The agency had to assess the underlying conduct whether Melissa disclosed it early or late. The purpose of the case was not to punish honesty, and silence would not have made the conduct disappear. A few weeks earlier, Melissa would have argued that distinction until everyone in the room was exhausted. This time she stared at the paper cup in her hands and let it stand. Then she asked what she should focus on first. Dana walked through the existing plan without turning it into a lecture. Keep the separation firm, complete the required work, use visits to practice safe parenting rather than to press Emma for reassurance, and let progress be reviewed through the normal process. There was still no promised date for Emma to return. Melissa's next question was about Emma, not herself. She asked whether Emma needed to know that the visit structure was staying the same because of what Melissa had just admitted. Dana said the child should be told only what she needed to understand her schedule and safety, not made responsible for adult findings or consequences. Melissa nodded again, but this time the movement looked different. It was not surrender to Dana. It was recognition that Emma did not need to carry the explanation. When the meeting ended, we stepped into the hallway together. Melissa stopped beside a window, overlooking the parking lot, and said, almost to herself, "I kept thinking, if I told the whole truth, somebody would finally tell me what happens next." "What happens next is the work," I said. She looked at me, tired enough that I expected the old accusation that I always made everything sound simple because I was not the one losing time with my child. Instead, she said, "Then I do the work." It was not forgiveness, and it was not relief. It was the first time I had heard her accept a future she could not control by choosing the right explanation. Emma was still staying with me. The visits were still structured. Melissa had made herself look worse on paper and gained nothing immediate from it except a clearer understanding of what she had to change. That was the cost Ryan had counted on her refusing to pay. Outside the building, she and I walked toward the parking lot together for the first time since she had restricted our conversations to Emma's schedule. The late August heat had settled over the pavement, and the air smelled like hot asphalt and cut grass from the strip beside the sidewalk. I did not know whether we were sisters again or merely two adults leaving the same meeting. Melissa stopped beside my car. I thought telling everything would at least make them see I'm not hiding anymore. They do see that. It didn't change today. No. She looked toward the building behind us. Maybe it shouldn't. That was the first time she had said something like that, without sounding as if she were trying to punish herself. I wanted to tell her not to go too far in the other direction. I wanted to say that accountability did not require hating herself, that Emma still loved her, that one day the relationship might look different. Those thoughts were true, but none of them belonged in that moment. So I said, "You asked what comes next. That matters." Melissa gave me a tired look. "Everything you say sounds like something Dana would put in a report now." For half a second, I thought she was angry. Then one corner of her mouth moved. It was not forgiveness. It was barely even humor. But it was the first thing between us that did not feel like a weapon. Emma's next visit with Melissa was still structured. I brought her in, confirmed the pickup time, and left them to the approved setting. I did not hover. When I returned, Emma came out carrying a paperback book Melissa had read with her and a sticker on the back of her hand. She looked lighter than she had after the previous visit. Not happy in some miraculous, healed way. Just less watchful. In the car, she asked if we could stop for frozen yogurt. It was the first time she had asked for something unnecessary, without first checking whether I was tired, busy, or in a bad mood. I said yes. She chose vanilla with too many sprinkles, and ate half before declaring herself full. I did not turn it into a lesson. I did not tell her how proud I was that she asked. I simply put the cup in the holder when she was done, and drove home. That evening, Melissa called at 7 as scheduled. Emma took the phone upstairs and talked to her about the book. I stayed in the kitchen where I could hear only the rise and fall of Emma's voice, not the words. When Emma brought the phone back, Melissa asked me to stay on. I waited until Emma had gone to brush her teeth. "What?" I asked. "My attorney called today." The criminal case had been moving on a track separate from the child welfare process. I had tried not to make it the center of Emma's life. She did not need adults discussing charges over breakfast or measuring her safety by what might happen in a courtroom months later. Melissa told me the prosecutor was keeping the serious, provable confinement case intact. The physical facts had not changed. The hallway, side bolt, the condition I found Emma and Melissa in, the medical timeline, Ryan's absence after seeing Melissa injured, and the communications in which he tried to reduce what happened to an argument that got out of hand. What had changed was the usefulness of Ryan's strategy. His lawyer could still say Melissa had participated in earlier room rules. Now Melissa agreed. His lawyer could still show the message in which she wrote that Emma had been making everything harder. Melissa no longer denied writing it or tried to explain it into harmlessness. His lawyer could still point to the duffel bag. Melissa had already admitted what it meant. The defense had spent weeks trying to turn Melissa's shame into uncertainty about Ryan. Once Melissa accepted the shame as her own responsibility, the argument stopped doing as much work for him. That did not mean the case was suddenly simple. Melissa was careful not to pretend it did. Criminal cases were still built around what could be proved, not around which adult had finally become morally clear. But the posture changed. Ryan's attorney began discussing a negotiated resolution rather than treating a trial as the obvious next step. I learned that first from Melissa, and later, in more limited terms, through the information available to me as a witness and caregiver. No one promised a sentence. No one told us justice was finished. The details of any plea and punishment still had to be resolved through the Franklin County court process. What mattered was that Ryan was no longer setting the emotional terms. He had minimized. When that failed, he had bargained. When Melissa's silence stopped protecting him, he had exposed her. And when she finally said yes, I did those things too. There was nowhere else for his leverage to go. A week later, I met Melissa outside the same building where one of her visits had just ended. Emma was inside, with a staff member finishing a drawing before I took her home. Melissa and I had a few minutes alone near a row of vending machines that hummed louder than either of us spoke. She looked tired, but different from the woman who had accused me of helping strangers steal her child. "I keep thinking about the first week," she said. "I thought if I could prove Ryan was gone, everything should go back." I did not answer because she was not asking me to. "I was so angry at you for saying that wasn't enough." "I know. I'm still angry sometimes." "I know that too." She folded her arms and stared at the floor. "I hate that Emma is sleeping at your house because of choices I made." There it was again, the old opening for me to make the pain smaller. I could have said temporary. I could have said you're doing better. I could have reminded her that Ryan caused the crisis. Instead, I waited. Melissa looked up. "If she has to stay with you longer because of what I did, then she stays." For a second, I could not speak. Not because the sentence was dramatic, because it was the first time since the midnight call that Melissa accepted losing something she desperately wanted without asking Emma, me, or anyone else to absorb the price for her. After Melissa corrected her account, the criminal case kept moving on its separate track. Ryan could still point to her failures, but he could no longer use them to make her retreat from the facts of the crisis. The hallway bolt, Emma's confinement, Melissa's injury, Ryan's departure without calling for help, and his own minimizing communications remained. Over the following weeks, his lawyer shifted from arguing over the meaning of the household history to negotiating a resolution around the conduct prosecutors believed they could prove. I did not sit in on those negotiations, and I did not pretend to understand every decision prosecutors made. I knew only what was explained to Melissa and what later became part of the proceeding I attended. Franklin County kept the serious, provable conduct at the center, instead of turning the case into a contest over every ugly moment in the relationship. Ryan eventually agreed to plead guilty to third-degree felony abduction under Ohio law for deliberately restraining Emma by force or threat under circumstances that placed her in fear. The agreement also resolved the companion domestic violence and child endangering issues tied to the same course of conduct. I was in the courtroom when the plea and sentence were finalized. Ryan looked smaller there than he ever had in Melissa's kitchen. That was not because he had changed. It was because the room did not organize itself around his mood. Nobody lowered a voice to keep him calm. Nobody sent a child away so he would not become irritated. Nobody needed his agreement about what words meant. He was simply a defendant, standing where he had been told to stand. Melissa sat several seats away from me. We had not returned to the kind of sisterhood where we whispered together through tense moments. We were polite now, careful. There were still places between us where trust had not grown back, but she came. She did not ask that the court excuse Ryan because she had once loved him. She did not ask anyone to punish him more harshly because she now hated what he had done. She sat through the consequences without trying to rewrite herself as the only innocent person in the room. The judge imposed a 30-month Ohio prison term on the third-degree felony abduction count. Ryan had no prior felony or domestic violence enhancement. The court sentenced him on the serious offense before it, without turning the hearing into spectacle. A post-conviction no-contact order also barred Ryan from contacting Emma and Melissa under the court's terms. He had no ownership interest in Melissa's house, and there was no legal path for him to simply move back in and resume the old arrangement. The no-contact order mattered in ordinary life, too. Melissa owned the house, kept the changed locks, and no longer had to organize the future around whether Ryan might try to return after prison. The legal boundary did not heal the house, but it made one thing plain. Proximity was no longer his leverage. When the hearing ended, I expected some enormous release. There wasn't one. Melissa cried quietly in the hallway for less than a minute. Then she wiped her face, thanked the person who had accompanied her from the victim services side of the process, and asked what time her next parenting session was. That question told me more than the tears did. Emma did not need the legal vocabulary. Later, when the adults had agreed on what she actually needed to know, I told her the simple part. Ryan was not allowed to come to her, call her, or come back to her mother's house. She sat at my kitchen table with a pencil between her fingers and asked whether that meant forever. I told her the order had rules and dates that grown-ups would handle, but she did not have to decide whether he deserved another chance. Even if he says sorry? She asked. Even then, you don't have to answer him. She rolled the pencil under her palm. Then came the question I had expected. So, can I go home now? I hated that the two things still sounded connected in her mind. Ryan had been the obvious danger, so his punishment should have meant the danger was finished. I told her mother was still doing the work that would decide when more time at home was safe. Ryan being gone mattered, but Mom's job was to show that Emma would never again have to wait quietly, ignore hunger, or manage an adult's anger to keep the house calm. Emma frowned because it was not the answer she wanted. Then she asked whether her next visit with Melissa was still Saturday. When I said yes, she went back to her homework. That was enough. She did not need a sentence length, a statute number, or a courtroom victory. She needed to know who could reach her, where she would sleep, and which adults were responsible for the next decision. Ryan going to prison did not send Emma home. That distinction became the final thing Melissa had to accept. The child welfare case had its own purpose. It was not a reward system where Ryan's conviction automatically restored everything Melissa had lost. By then she had started counseling, protective parenting work, and the practical pieces of her safety plan. She had maintained the separation even when Ryan's lawyer used her own words against her. She had stopped asking Dana to treat changed locks as proof that all danger was gone. The work was slower than apology. At first, her visits with Emma remained structured and supervised. Melissa hated that. I could see it every time she had to leave before Emma did, Every time another adult remained close enough to observe, every time she wanted to take her daughter home for dinner and could not. But she stopped fighting the existence of the condition. Instead, she started doing the things that could change it. She arrived early. She followed the boundaries. She did not question Emma about what she had told me, or what anyone had asked her. If Emma became quiet, Melissa did not demand an explanation. If Emma asked for a snack, Melissa gave her one without turning it into a lesson about gratitude or behavior. When Emma wanted to bring a drawing back to my house, Melissa did not say it belonged at home with Mom. The changes were small enough that nobody could use them for a dramatic speech. That was why I trusted them more. A few months earlier, Melissa had wanted everyone to believe she was safe, because she said she was done with Ryan. Now she understood that safety was something other people had a right to observe in her choices. Over time, her contact expanded. A supervised visit became a longer visit. Longer visits became structured outings. Later, there were stretches when she and Emma could spend more ordinary time together under the plan, without every minute feeling like an evaluation. No one promised a date when Emma would simply move back home and erase everything between August and then. Melissa stopped asking for one. She still wanted her daughter home. I never doubted that. But wanting it and demanding it had become two different things. The first time Melissa was approved for a longer outing without someone sitting beside them the entire time, I expected both of us to be nervous. Emma had been looking forward to it for days. Melissa planned lunch and a trip to the science center, and before they left, she checked the return time twice as if punctuality itself could prove she was ready. They came back almost an hour early. I opened the door expecting something had gone wrong. Emma walked past me, carrying a paper cup with a plastic dinosaur sticking out of it, and went straight to the couch. Melissa stayed on the porch. She told me Emma had gotten tired. Emma had apparently gone quiet after lunch, and said she wanted to go back to my house. Months earlier, Melissa might have heard that as rejection. She might have persuaded, bargained, or reminded Emma how much she had wanted the outing. This time she asked once whether Emma felt sick. When Emma said no, just tired, Melissa brought her back. "You didn't have to end it early," I said. "Yes, I did." There was no bitterness in the answer. She said she was done. "I'm trying to learn that I don't get to make her stay somewhere just because I want more time." That was the kind of change no apology could substitute for. Melissa had lost an hour she wanted with her daughter, and had not made Emma responsible for the loss. Later, Dana treated moments like that for what they were, not proof that everything was repaired, but evidence that Melissa could respond to Emma's needs without turning them into a threat to the relationship. Expanded contact continued because of a pattern of choices, not because anyone forgot what had happened. Emma changed too, though not in a straight line. There were nights she still asked whether Mom was mad at her. There were mornings she wanted the same cereal for 3 days, and then cried because I bought the wrong brand of yogurt. There were visits she came home happy, and visits that left her quiet. Healing did not turn her into a cheerful child who had learned a lesson. Mostly, it made her more ordinary. One Saturday morning, I found her standing in front of my pantry with a granola bar in one hand and a box of crackers in the other. For a second, I expected the old question, "Can I have this?" Instead, she looked at me and said, "I'm taking the crackers because the granola bars taste weird now." Then she walked away. I stared at the pantry after she left. Months earlier, she had asked permission for food I had already told her she could eat. Now she had rejected something I bought because she did not like it. It was such a small act of ingratitude that I nearly laughed. I did not praise her for it. I did not tell her how brave she was. I let her be 7. That became my rule more and more. Not every sign of recovery needed an adult to name it. She began choosing her own bedtime books instead of waiting for me to suggest one. She told me when the bathwater was too hot. She asked me to cut sandwiches into rectangles instead of triangles because triangles made too much crust happen, which made no geometric sense but apparently made complete sense to her. She complained when I made her wear a sweater she did not want. She left a half-finished cup of milk on the coffee table even though I had told her twice to take it to the sink. Each ordinary annoyance felt like proof that she no longer spent every minute measuring the temperature of the adults around her. Melissa noticed the changes too. She did not always know how to hold the happiness and grief together. Once, after a visit, she stood beside my car while Emma buckled herself into the back seat and said quietly, "She argues with you now. About everything." Melissa smiled, then looked away. I used to think quiet meant she was doing okay. I did not answer. She did not need me to complete the thought for her. Our own relationship rebuilt in pieces that were less satisfying than forgiveness and more useful than pretending. At first, we talked only about Emma. Then one day, Melissa asked whether my bank had finally replaced the awful parking lot lights I had complained about the previous winter. A week later, she sent me a photo of a lopsided tomato she had grown in a pot behind her house. I responded that it looked diseased. She said I had no respect for agriculture. It would have been easy to treat those exchanges as proof everything was fixed. It was not. There were still things I could not forget simply because Melissa had finally admitted them. There were moments she looked at Emma, and I could see her remembering the bag by the door. There were moments I looked at Melissa and remembered the phone call where she accused me of helping them keep her daughter away. Love came back before ease did. One afternoon, after Emma's contact had expanded, but before any final reunification decision had been made, Melissa asked if she could speak to me alone after a scheduled handoff. We stood in the parking lot beside my car. Emma was inside the building finishing an activity with another adult, so for once neither of us had to monitor our words around her. Melissa looked tired, but not the brittle kind of tired I had seen after the hospital. This was the tiredness of somebody who had spent months doing things that did not produce immediate rewards. "I keep thinking about the night she called you," she said. "If she hadn't asked me about that bag, I don't know how long I would have kept telling myself I was managing it." There was no defense in the sentence. "That's hard to hear," I said. "I know." She rubbed her thumb over the edge of her car key. "I also keep thinking about what you told them. I hated you for it." "I know that too. I wanted you to say you were sorry." She gave a small, humorless smile. "Part of me still does." That was the closest she had come to asking for the old Laura back, the sister who could turn pain into reassurance if everyone waited long enough. "I am sorry it hurt you," I said. Her face tightened. I knew immediately that the sentence was not enough for what she wanted. She wanted me to say I should have protected her from the consequence. She wanted me to tell her that because she was trying now, the decision I made then no longer needed to stand between us. I loved her enough to want to give her that. That was exactly why I did not. "I love you," I said, "but I will not make her unsafe, so you can feel forgiven." Melissa closed her eyes. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she nodded. Not dramatically, not gratefully, just once. "I know." It was the first time she accepted that boundary, without trying to argue it smaller. When Emma came out, Melissa did not turn the moment into a performance. She hugged her daughter, reminded her about a school library book she had left in the side pocket of her backpack, and told her she would see her at the next scheduled visit. Emma said, "Okay, Mom," and climbed into my car. On the drive home, she talked about a class project involving lima beans in plastic cups. That evening, she ate 2 helpings of pasta and announced that my sauce had too many tomato pieces. I told her that was because tomatoes were in tomato sauce. She told me that was not the point. After dinner, she picked a chapter book from the shelf and read beside me on the couch until she began skipping lines because she was tired. Her room had changed gradually during the months she stayed with me. At first, it had been my spare room with a child temporarily placed inside it, borrowed night, light, folded clothes, A few familiar things from Melissa's house. Now there were school papers taped crookedly above the desk, a stuffed rabbit under the blanket, and a row of library books that never stayed in order. Nothing about the room promised permanence. Nothing about it threatened departure either. It was simply the room where Emma slept while the adults responsible for her kept doing the work they were supposed to do. At bedtime, she brushed her teeth and climbed under the covers. I read the last page of the chapter, because she insisted we could not stop with one paragraph left. Then I stood to leave. Emma looked toward the doorway. For a long time, I had made the decision for her without thinking about it. I left the door partly open because that seemed gentler, safer, easier. That night, I asked, "Do you want it open or closed?" She considered the question as seriously as if I had asked her to choose a house. Closed. All the way? Yes. The bedroom door had an ordinary privacy lock on the inside, the kind a child could use and an adult could open in an emergency if necessary. There was nothing on the hallway side that could hold her in. No high-mounted bolt. No mechanism designed for someone outside the room to decide when she was allowed to leave. I did not explain any of that to her. She already knew what the question meant. I stepped into the hallway. Emma reached over from the bed and pushed the door closed herself. The latch clicked. I stood there for 1 second, listening to the quiet, then went downstairs. Less than a minute later, I heard the door open above me and Emma's feet on the hallway floor. "Aunt Laura?" I looked up. She leaned over the railing, hair messy from the pillow already. "Can I have a glass of water?" "Of course." She came down 2 steps while I went toward the kitchen, then changed her mind and padded back to her room, leaving the door open behind her. Nothing dramatic happened. She had closed the door because she wanted privacy, and opened it because she wanted water. At last, both choices belonged to her.